Warriors and Valkyries, welcome to our Hall of Norse Tales. Before we embark on our journey through the fjords of imagination, don't forget to join our tribe. Ring the notification bell, raise your axes by giving a like, and leave in the comments which realm you're watching from. Now, settle close to the hearth, for our saga is about to begin. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the fjord, Leif stood at the bow of his longship, feeling the gentle sway of the ocean beneath him. The salty breeze carried whispers of adventure, hinting at the magical journey that lay ahead. I awoke to silence. Not the peaceful quiet of a winter's morning, but the smothering stillness of a world buried alive. My eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, I thought I'd gone blind. The window, usually letting in the pale dawn light, was a wall of white. "Astrid," I whispered, reaching for my wife. My hand found only cold furs. Panic gripped me as I fumbled in the darkness, my fingers finally closing around the rough handle of a candle. The flint sparked, and a tiny flame sputtered to life, pushing back the shadows but doing little to ward off the bone-deep chill that had settled into our home. Astrid was huddled by the hearth, futilely trying to coax warmth from the dying embers. Our daughter Ingrid was wrapped in every blanket we owned, her small form shivering despite the layers. "The snow," Astrid said, her voice hoarse. "It hasn't stopped all night." I moved to the window, scraping frost from the glass with my fingernail. Outside was a world transformed. Frosthaven, our proud village of hardy Norsemen, was little more than a collection of snow-capped lumps. The paths between houses were gone, swallowed by drifts taller than a man. "By Odin's beard," I breathed, my words forming a cloud in the frigid air. A horn bellowed in the distance, 3 long blasts, the chief's call to assembly. "Stay here," I told Astrid, already reaching for my furs. "Keep Ingrid warm. I'll bring back word." The door protested as I shoved it open, snow spilling onto the floor. The wind hit me like a physical blow, icy fingers clawing at any exposed skin. I waded through snow up to my thighs, each step a battle against nature itself. Other villagers emerged from their homes, pale ghosts in a world of white. We converged on the Great Hall, a building that had always stood as a symbol of our strength and unity. Now, with icicles hanging from its eaves like jagged teeth, it looked more like the maw of some great beast waiting to devour us. Inside, the hall was packed. Bodies pressed together, seeking warmth, but there was little to be found. Our breath rose in a great cloud, and the scent of fear hung heavy in the air. Chief Gunnar stood on the raised platform, his face grim. The usual fire of leadership in his eyes had dimmed, replaced by something I'd never seen there before. Doubt. "My people," he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "I won't mince words. We face the greatest threat in Frosthaven's history." A murmur ran through the crowd. Mothers clutched children closer, men gripped their weapons tighter. "The winter stores are nearly depleted," Gunnar continued. "At our current rate, we have perhaps a week's worth of food left, maybe less." The murmur became a roar, voices raised in anger and fear and desperation. "What of the hunting parties? We can't just sit here and starve. The gods have abandoned us." Gunnar raised his hands, calling for silence. "The last hunting party returned empty-handed 3 days ago. 2 did not return at all." A woman near me began to sob. I recognized her as Helga, wife of one of the missing hunters. "What are we to do?" someone shouted. "Our children cry from hunger even now." As if summoned by the words, a wail rose from the back of the hall. A child, no more than 3 winters old, screamed in hunger and fear. The sound cut through the cacophony like a knife, silencing every voice. In that moment of quiet, the door to the hall burst open. A gust of frigid wind swept in, carrying with it the village elder Bjorn. His beard was caked with ice, his eyes wild. "Gunnar," he rasped, stumbling forward. "I've seen it. I know what must be done." The chief's brow furrowed. "Seen what, old man? Speak sense." Bjorn pushed his way through the crowd, leaving a trail of melting snow. When he reached the platform, he gripped Gunnar's fur cloak with gnarled hands. "The frozen peaks," Bjorn said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet somehow carrying to every ear in the hall. "The answer lies in the frozen peaks." A collective shudder ran through the assembly. The frozen peaks were a place of legend, said to be the home of ice giants and worse things. No one who ventured there ever returned. Gunnar gently pried Bjorn's hands from his cloak. "The cold has addled your mind, old friend. There's nothing in those cursed mountains but death." Bjorn's eyes flashed. "Death surrounds us already. Can you not see it?" As if to punctuate his words, a commotion erupted near the hall's entrance. People scrambled to make way, as two men carried in a third between them. They laid the body, for it was clear now that it was a body, at the foot of the platform. I recognized the face, though it was blue and lifeless. Thorstein, one of our strongest warriors, felled not by blade or beast but by the merciless cold. A keening wail rose from the crowd. Thorstein's wife threw herself upon his frozen form, her cries echoing in the rafters. Gunnar's face had turned ashen. He looked from the body to Bjorn, then out at the sea of frightened faces before him. "We cannot stay here," Bjorn pressed. "The frozen peaks are our only hope." "It's madness," Gunnar muttered, but I could see the resolve crumbling in his eyes. As the chief wrestled with his decision, I found my gaze drawn to Bjorn. There was something in the old man's stance, a tension in his body that spoke of more than just the urgency of our situation. In the flickering torchlight, I could have sworn I saw him slip something into the folds of his cloak, something wrapped in cloth that glinted dully before disappearing from view. A chill that had nothing to do with the cold ran down my spine. Bjorn's eyes met mine for a brief moment, and in them I saw a glimmer of something that made my blood run cold. Knowledge? Madness? Or something else entirely? Before I could ponder it further, Gunnar cleared his throat. The hall fell silent once more, all eyes turning to our leader. "Very well," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of command. "Bjorn, you will lead a party to these frozen peaks. But know this, if you do not return with salvation, you doom not only yourselves but those left behind." Bjorn nodded solemnly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that behind his weathered facade, the old man was smiling. As the hall erupted into a flurry of planning and preparation, I stood rooted to the spot. A choice lay before me, as clear and cold as the ice outside. Stay with my family, protecting them as best I could against the encroaching winter, or venture into the unknown on a fool's errand that might be our only hope. In that moment, watching Bjorn huddle with Gunnar and the village's strongest warriors, I made my decision. Come dawn, I would join the expedition to the frozen peaks. May the gods have mercy on us all. The night passed in a haze of restless sleep and gnawing hunger. When I finally emerged from my home, the pale light of dawn was just beginning to touch the snow-capped roofs of Frosthaven. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe, each inhalation feeling like swallowing shards of ice. As I made my way to the village center, I saw others emerging from their homes, drawn by the same purpose. Bjorn had called for volunteers, and despite the madness of his plan, desperation drove us forward. The old man stood atop a pile of firewood, his figure gaunt against the colorless sky. His eyes gleamed with a fervor that sent a shiver down my spine. Was it hope or madness that drove him? "People of Frosthaven," Bjorn's voice carried across the gathered crowd, strong despite his years. "We stand at the precipice of our greatest trial. The cruel winter seeks to claim us, but I say we shall not go quietly into that endless night." A murmur rippled through the crowd. I could feel the tension, the fear, but also a spark of something else, a desperate hope kindling in the hearts of my fellow villagers. "The frozen peaks hold the key to our survival," Bjorn continued, his gnarled hand pointing towards the distant mountains barely visible through the swirling snow. "Game still roams those treacherous slopes, and we must claim it if we are to see another spring." A voice called out from the crowd, thick with skepticism. "And how do you know this, old man? Have you seen it with your own eyes?" Bjorn's gaze snapped to the speaker, and I swore I saw something dark flicker across his face before it settled back into a mask of determination. "The gods have shown me the way," he said, his voice low and intense. "In dreams and visions, they have revealed our path." More murmurs, some of disbelief, others of awe. I found myself torn, part of me wanting to believe, another part screaming that this was folly. "I need 6 brave souls to join me on this quest," Bjorn declared. 6 who are willing to risk everything for the chance to save our people. The silence that followed was deafening. We all knew the dangers of the frozen peaks, the treacherous ice, the bone-chilling cold, the beasts that lurked in the endless white. To venture there was to court death. And yet, "I'll go." The words left my mouth before I could stop them. All eyes turned to me, some wide with shock, others narrowed in respect or pity. Bjorn's face split into a wide grin. "Ah, Eriksson, a brave man indeed. Who else will join us?" Slowly, others stepped forward. Torben, our best hunter. Helga, her eyes hard with the wind howled like 1,000 angry spirits, each gust threatening to tear us from the narrow mountain path. A voice called out from the crowd, thick with skepticism. "And how do you know this, old man? Have you seen it with your own eyes?" Bjorn's gaze snapped to the speaker, and I swore I saw something dark flicker across his face before it settled back into a mask of determination. "The gods have shown me the way," he said, his voice low and intense. "In dreams and visions, they have revealed our path." More murmurs, some of disbelief, others of awe. I found myself torn, part of me wanting to believe, another part screaming that this was folly. "I need 6 brave souls to join me on this quest," Bjorn declared. 6 who are willing to risk everything for the chance to save our people. The silence that followed was deafening. We all knew the dangers of the frozen peaks, the treacherous ice, the bone-chilling cold, the beasts that lurked in the endless white. To venture there was to court death. And yet, "I'll go." The words left my mouth before I could stop them. All eyes turned to me, some wide with shock, others narrowed in respect or pity. Bjorn's face split into a wide grin. "Ah, Eriksson, a brave man indeed. Who else will join us?" Slowly, others stepped forward. Torben, our best hunter. Helga, her eyes hard with the wind howled like 1,000 angry spirits, each gust threatening to tear us from the narrow mountain path. Snow pelted our faces, sharp as needles, obscuring our vision and numbing our senses. We'd been climbing for what felt like days, though in truth it had only been since dawn. "We must find shelter soon," I shouted over the tempest, my words nearly lost in the maelstrom. Bjorn, leading our small party, turned back to face us. His beard was encrusted with ice, his eyes barely visible beneath his frost-covered brows. "Push on," he called back. "The gods do not reward the weak." I exchanged glances with Leif, my childhood friend who had also volunteered for this mad quest. His expression mirrored my own doubt and exhaustion. "The old man will kill us all," Leif muttered, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. As we rounded a bend in the path, the wind suddenly intensified. It shrieked through the rocks, sounding almost human in its fury. Ahead of me, I saw Gunnar's son, Eric, lose his footing. "Eric!" I cried out, lunging forward. My hand closed around his pack, but the weight and momentum nearly pulled us both over the edge. For a heart-stopping moment, we teetered on the brink, staring down at the dizzying drop below. Then, strong hands gripped my furs, hauling us both back to safety. Leif's face was pale as he released his hold on me. "By the gods," he breathed, "that was too close." Eric, shaken but alive, nodded his thanks. I thought that was the end. It may well have been. Bjorn's voice cut through our relief. The old man stood before us, his eyes glinting with an unsettling light. "The mountain does not suffer the unprepared. We must be ever vigilant, ever strong." I couldn't shake the feeling that Bjorn sounded almost disappointed, as if he'd been cheated out of something by Eric's rescue. "We need rest," I insisted, standing to face our leader. "The path only grows more treacherous. In this condition, we're more likely to fall to our deaths than find any game." Bjorn's gaze locked with mine, and for a moment, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Then he nodded, almost imperceptibly. "Very well. There's a cave system ahead. We'll shelter there and continue at first light." As we trudged onward, I found myself walking beside Helga, our village's healer. She'd insisted on coming, arguing that we'd need her skills on such a dangerous journey. Now she leaned close to speak without being overheard. "Something's not right with the old man," she murmured. "Have you noticed how he barely eats? How he never seems to tire?" I had noticed, but hearing Helga voice her concerns made them suddenly more real. "Maybe it's just his experience," I offered weakly. "He's survived harsher winters than any of us." Helga shook her head. "No, it's more than that. Last night I saw him, talking to something in his pack, something wrapped in cloth." The memory of Bjorn slipping that mysterious object into his belongings before we left flashed through my mind. I opened my mouth to respond, but Bjorn's voice rang out, cutting off our whispered conversation. "Here, the caves." Before us loomed the mouth of a cave, a dark maw in the white landscape. As we approached, a sense of unease settled over me. The opening was oddly regular, almost as if it had been carved rather than formed naturally. "Doesn't this seem a bit convenient?" Leif voiced my thoughts. Bjorn turned, his smile unsettling in the fading light. "The gods provide for those who are worthy," he said. "Now inside, before the storm worsens." We filed into the cave, grateful for the respite from the howling wind. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I realized the cave was larger than it had appeared from outside. Tunnels branched off in several directions, disappearing into darkness. "We'll camp here in the main chamber," Bjorn declared. "Do not explore the tunnels. The mountain is treacherous, and we cannot afford to lose anyone." As we settled in, gathering what meager firewood we could find, a low growl echoed from one of the tunnels. We froze, hands instinctively moving to our weapons. "What was that?" Eric whispered, his eyes wide with fear. Before anyone could answer, a massive shape lumbered into view. A bear larger than any I'd ever seen, its fur matted with ice and blood. Its eyes gleamed with hunger and madness. "Weapons!" Bjorn shouted, but in the confined space of the cave we were at a disadvantage. The bear roared, the sound deafening in the enclosed space, and charged. I dove to the side, feeling the rush of air as massive claws swept past where I'd been standing. Chaos erupted as we scrambled to defend ourselves. Leif managed to land a blow with his axe, but it seemed to only enrage the beast further. It rounded on him, jaws snapping. "Leif!" I cried out, desperately searching for a way to help my friend. Then Bjorn stepped forward. In one hand he held a burning branch from our fledgling fire. In the other, nothing. He faced the bear armed with only a torch and what looked like sheer madness. "Bjorn, no!" Helga screamed, but the old man paid no heed. What happened next I still struggle to comprehend. Bjorn began to chant, words in a language I didn't recognize. The flames of his torch seemed to grow, to twist and writhe in unnatural ways. The bear, poised to attack, suddenly hesitated. Bjorn's voice rose to a fever pitch, and the fire leapt from the torch. It engulfed the bear, but instead of the stench of burning fur, I smelled nothing. The flames were cold, and as they consumed the beast, it let out a sound that was more human than animal. In moments, it was over. Where the monstrous bear had stood, there was now only a scorch mark on the cave floor. We stared at Bjorn in shock and growing fear. The old man stood still for a moment, then stumbled, the torch falling from his grip and guttering out on the stone floor. The gods are with us," he mumbled before collapsing. As the others rushed to Bjorn's aid, I found myself rooted to the spot. What had I just witnessed? My eyes were drawn to Bjorn's pack, thrown aside in the chaos of the battle. The cloth-wrapped object had fallen out, its covering partially pulled away. In the dying firelight, I caught a glimpse of something ancient and terrible. Runes carved into stone, pulsing with a sickly light. I quickly looked away, my stomach churning. As night fell outside, our sanctuary turned battleground. I huddled in my furs, unable to sleep. The sound of Bjorn's voice drifted to me, and I realized he was awake, whispering to that damned object he carried. "Soon," I heard him murmur. "Soon, the price will be paid, and you shall feast again." A shudder ran through me. What had we gotten ourselves into? And more importantly, how could we hope to survive not just the mountain, but the madman leading us to our doom? As I finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that our real journey and our real trials were only just beginning. The cave's darkness pressed against us like a living thing, hungry and patient. After the bear's supernatural demise, none of us slept easily. We huddled around the meager fire, our small circle of light a fragile barrier against the unknown horrors that might lurk in the shadows. Leif's voice broke the uneasy silence. "We should share tales," he suggested, his usual bravado subdued, "to keep our spirits up." Eric nodded eagerly, relief evident on his young face. "Yes, stories of the old gods, of Thor's might and Odin's wisdom." Helga's eyes flicked towards Bjorn, who sat apart from us, still as stone. "Perhaps," she said softly, "we should speak of other things." But Bjorn stirred at the mention of the gods. He turned to us, firelight dancing in his eyes. "Yes," he rasped. "Let us speak of the old ways, of sacrifice and survival." A chill ran down my spine at his words. Bjorn began to speak, his voice taking on a rhythmic quality that was both mesmerizing and unsettling. "In the time before time," he intoned, "when the world was young and the gods walked among us, there were no boundaries between their realm and ours. They fed on our worship, our sacrifices, and in return, they granted us power beyond mortal ken." As Bjorn spoke, the fire seemed to dim, the shadows growing longer. I found myself leaning forward, drawn in despite my misgivings. "But men grew proud," Bjorn continued. "They thought to challenge the gods, to claim their power for themselves. And so the gods withdrew, taking their gifts with them." Eric interrupted, his voice barely a whisper. "But they didn't leave us entirely, did they? We still make offerings, still pray for their favor." Bjorn's laugh was like ice cracking. "Offerings, prayers, pale imitations of the true rites. The gods hunger for more than grain and mead, boy. They crave blood and bone, flesh and soul." Helga stood abruptly. "Enough of this talk," she said firmly. "We should rest. Tomorrow's journey will be hard enough without filling our heads with dark tales." As the others settled into uneasy sleep, I found myself drifting off, Bjorn's words echoing in my mind. In my dreams, I stood atop a mountain of corpses, their faces familiar. The people of Frosthaven. At the peak stood Bjorn, crowned in ice, his arms raised to a sky that rained blood. I awoke with a start, heart pounding. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows across the sleeping forms of my companions. But one form was missing. Bjorn. Fighting down a surge of panic, I rose quietly, careful not to wake the others. The old man's pack lay where he had been sitting, the mysterious cloth-wrapped object peeking out. For a moment I was tempted to look, to uncover whatever secret Bjorn was hiding. But a cold gust of air from the cave's entrance stayed my hand. Pulling my furs tight around me, I made my way to the cave's mouth. Outside, the storm had abated, leaving behind a world transformed. Moonlight glinted off the snow-covered landscape, turning everything to silver and shadow. And there, silhouetted against the starry sky, stood Bjorn. He was facing away from the cave, arms raised as if in supplication. As I watched, frozen in place, he began to move. It was no dance I recognized. his movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. I must have made some sound, a gasp or a step on loose stone, for Bjorn suddenly whirled to face me. His eyes, catching the moonlight, seemed to glow with an inner fire. "Ah," he said, his voice unnaturally calm. "Our sentry awakens." I struggled to find my voice. "Bjorn, what are you doing out here?" He smiled, and in that moment, he looked nothing like the wizened elder I had known all my life. "Ensuring our survival, of course. There are necessary evils in this world, prices that must be paid." I took a step back, my foot finding the safety of the cave's entrance. "What prices? Bjorn, you're not making sense." He advanced, moving with a grace that belied his years. "Oh, but I am. You've seen it, haven't you? The game that appears as if by magic, the storms that part just as we need shelter. Do you think that comes without cost?" My mind raced, piecing together the strange occurrences of our journey. The convenient cave, the bear's unnatural demise, the whispers in the night. "The object," I said, realization dawning. "The thing you carry. What is it?" Bjorn's smile widened. "A key, a conduit, a bridge between worlds." He reached into his robes, pulling out the cloth-wrapped item. "Would you like to see?" Every instinct screamed at me to run, to wake the others, to flee this madness. But I found myself rooted to the spot as Bjorn slowly unwrapped the object. It was a stone, roughly the size of a man's fist, covered in runes that seemed to writhe and shift as I looked at them. In the center was carved a crude face, its mouth open in a silent scream or laugh. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Bjorn whispered, his eyes never leaving the stone. "I found it years ago, buried in the ice. It spoke to me, showed me the old ways, the true ways." I tore my gaze away from the horrifying artifact. "Bjorn, this is wrong. Whatever you're doing, whatever you think this will accomplish, it can't be worth the cost." His eyes snapped to mine, and in them, I saw a yawning abyss of madness. "Worth the cost?" he snarled. "What do you know of cost? I have seen our village fall not just to this winter but to 100 winters. I have watched children starve and strong men wither. No more." He thrust the stone towards me and I stumbled back, nearly falling. "The old gods are hungry," Bjorn hissed. "They demand sacrifice, yes, but they reward those who serve. Our village will not just survive, it will thrive." "At what price?" I demanded, finding a reserve of courage I didn't know I possessed. "How many lives will it take to satiate your gods?" Bjorn's face softened, taking on an almost paternal expression. "Oh, my boy," he said gently. "All of them. Every last one." A scream built in my throat, but before I could voice it, a shout came from inside the cave. "Hello? Is anyone there?" Leif's voice, thick with sleep, but edged with concern. Bjorn's demeanor changed in an instant, the madness hidden behind a mask of grandfatherly concern. "Out here, Leif?" he called back. "Just checking the weather. I believe we'll have fair traveling today." As Leif and the others emerged, rubbing sleep from their eyes, Bjorn turned to me one last time. "Soon," he murmured, too low for the others to hear. "Soon, you'll understand. The price of survival is high, but the rewards... Oh, the rewards are beyond imagining." He brushed past me, all smiles and reassurances for our companions. I stood there, frozen, as the rising sun turned the world to gold and crimson. It should have been beautiful, but all I could see was the red of sacrifice, the gleam of madness in Bjorn's eyes. As we broke camp and prepared to continue our journey, one thought echoed in my mind. We were no longer searching for salvation in these frozen peaks. We were bringing damnation down upon us all. We crested the final ridge, our breaths coming in ragged gasps that froze instantly in the thin air. Before us stretched a vista both beautiful and terrifying. The frozen peaks, a jagged crown of ice piercing the gray sky. The mountains loomed impossibly tall, their surfaces glittering with an unnatural sheen that made my eyes water. "By the gods," Leif whispered beside me, his voice a mix of awe and fear. Bjorn stood at the forefront of our small group, his arms spread wide as if embracing the forbidding landscape. "We have arrived," he announced, his voice carrying an undercurrent of excitement that made my skin crawl. "The hunting grounds of the ancients." Eric, always eager to please, stepped forward. "Where do we begin, Elder? Surely no game could survive in such a barren place." Bjorn turned, fixing the young man with a stare that seemed to look through him rather than at him. "Appearances can be deceiving, boy. This land is far from barren. It teems with life and power." As we began our descent into the valley between the peaks, an unsettling mist began to rise around us. It curled and twisted in ways that defied the wind, sometimes taking shapes that seemed almost human before dissipating. "Stay close," I called out, fighting to keep the tremor from my voice. This fog could separate us in an instant. Helga fell into step beside me, her face etched with worry. "Something's not right," she murmured. "Can you feel it? The air itself seems hungry." I nodded, grateful that I wasn't the only one sensing the wrongness that permeated this place. "Keep your eyes open," I whispered back, "and watch Bjorn. I fear he—" My words were cut short by a shout from Eric. "Look, there, in the mist." We all turned, squinting into the swirling fog. For a moment, I saw nothing. Then, a shape emerged, the unmistakable silhouette of a great elk, its antlers spreading wide like the branches of an ancient tree. "Impossible," Leif breathed. "No elk could survive up here." But there it was, as real as the ice beneath our feet. And it wasn't alone. As we watched in stunned silence, more shapes appeared in the mist. Deer, boar, even what looked like a massive bear. "The gods smile upon us," Eric cried, already reaching for his bow. But something held me back. The animals moved strangely, with a fluid grace that seemed almost choreographed. And their eyes, when I caught glimpses of them through the fog, reflected no light. "Wait!" I called out, but it was too late. Eric had already loosed an arrow. The shaft flew true, striking the elk squarely in the chest, but instead of falling, the beast simply unraveled. Its form dispersed like smoke, the arrow clattering to the ground where it had stood. "What sorcery is this?" Leif demanded, drawing his axe. Bjorn's laughter rang out high and wild. "Not sorcery, my friends. A gift. The old ones test us, show us visions of plenty. We must prove ourselves worthy." As if in response to his words, the mist thickened, and the spectral animals began to move with purpose, straight towards us. "Form a circle," I shouted, drawing my own weapon. "Back to back." We huddled together as the phantoms closed in. I swung my sword at a charging boar, feeling a chill run through my arm as the blade passed harmlessly through its form. Beside me, Helga cried out as a ghostly bear's paw swept through her, leaving no mark but causing her to stumble as if struck. "This is madness," Leif roared, his axe whistling through empty air. "How do we fight what isn't there?" Through the chaos, I caught sight of Bjorn. The old man stood apart from our group, arms raised, chanting in that strange language I'd heard him use in the cave. With each word, the mist seemed to pulse, the phantom beasts growing more solid, more real. "Bjorn," I called out. "Stop this. Whatever you're doing, it's going to get us all killed." For a moment his eyes met mine, and I saw in them a mixture of ecstasy and utter madness. "Killed?" he laughed. "No, my boy. This is how we live." Suddenly the mist parted, and a real animal stood before us, a massive elk, larger than any I'd ever seen. Its eyes gleamed with intelligence, and its antlers seemed to spark with an inner fire. "There!" Eric cried triumphantly. "A real quarry at last!" Before any of us could stop him, he knocked an arrow and let it fly. The shaft struck true, burying itself in the elk's broad chest, but instead of falling, the beast fixed its gaze on Eric. I watched in horror as the young man's eyes widened, his mouth opening in a silent scream. Then in the space between one heartbeat and the next, Eric simply vanished. "Eric!" Leif's anguished cry echoed across the icy landscape. Where our companion had stood, there was nothing but disturbed snow and his fallen bow. The elk pawed the ground once, dislodging the arrow as if it were no more than an irritating splinter. Then it turned and loped away, disappearing into the mist as suddenly as it had appeared. What just happened?" Helga stammered, her face pale with shock. I rounded on Bjorn, fury overcoming my fear. "What have you done?" I demanded. "Where is Eric?" The old man's eyes were fever-bright, his smile stretching unnaturally wide. "Gone to feed the old ones," he said, as casually as if discussing the weather. "A worthy first sacrifice." "Sacrifice?" Leif roared, advancing on Bjorn with his axe raised. "You mad old fool, I'll send you to join your old ones myself." But before he could reach Bjorn, the mist thickened once more, separating us. I heard Leif's frustrated cry, then silence. "Leif," I called out. "Helga, where are you?" No answer came. The fog pressed in, so thick now that I could barely see my own hand in front of my face. Panic clawed at my throat as I spun in place, trying to get my bearings. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the mist receded. I found myself standing alone on a small plateau, the others nowhere in sight. In the distance, I could make out a dark opening in the side of the mountain, a cave or tunnel leading into the heart of the frozen peaks. As night began to fall, painting the ice in shades of purple and deep blue, I heard it, chanting on the wind. Bjorn's voice carried to me across the impossible distances of this cursed place. "Come," it seemed to say. "Come and witness the rebirth of the old ways. Come and see the price of survival." I stood there, shivering not just from the cold, but from the weight of the choice before me. To venture into that dark opening, following the mad dreams of a man who had led us to this nightmare, or to turn back, to try and find my way home through a landscape that defied all natural laws. As the last light faded from the sky, I made my decision. With a silent prayer to gods I no longer trusted, I began the long walk towards the cave. Whatever horrors awaited within, I knew I had to face them. For Eric, for Leif, for Helga, for all of Frosthaven. The mouth of the cave loomed before me, a gateway to untold terrors. As I stepped into its shadows, Bjorn's words echoed in my mind. The price of survival is high, but the rewards, oh, the rewards are beyond imagining. I only hoped that when the final price was tallied, there would be something left of us to survive. The journey back to Frosthaven was a blur of white landscapes and unnatural silence. We trudged through snow that seemed to part before us, winds that mysteriously calmed as we approached. Our packs were laden with game, more than we'd ever hoped to find in these barren peaks. Yet the abundance brought no joy, only a creeping dread that tightened its grip with each step towards home. As we crested the final hill, Frosthaven came into view. Smoke rose from chimneys, and figures moved about, signs of life we'd feared we might never see again. A horn sounded, announcing our return, and soon a crowd gathered at the village gates. "They return!" I heard a voice cry out. "Praise the gods! They return!" Bjorn, leading our diminished party, raised his arms in triumph. "We bring salvation," he called out, his voice carrying an authority I'd never heard before. "The gods have blessed our hunt." The villagers surged forward, faces gaunt with hunger transformed by hope and relief. They pulled us into embraces, tears freezing on their cheeks. In the commotion, I lost sight of Bjorn, but his voice rang out over the crowd. "Prepare a feast. Tonight we celebrate the old ways and the bounty they have brought us." As the others busied themselves with preparations, I found myself ushered into the great hall. Fires roared in the hearths, pushing back the chill that had seemed a permanent fixture for so long. Tables groaned under the weight of our hunt, meat already roasting on spits. I stood apart, watching as my fellow villagers tore into the food with desperate enthusiasm. My own stomach churned, remembering the unnatural ease with which we'd acquired this bounty. "You're not eating." I turned to find Astrid, my wife, standing beside me. Her eyes searched my face, concern etched in the lines around them. "I'm not hungry," I managed, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. Astrid's brow furrowed. "What happened out there? Where are Eric and Leif?" Before I could answer, Bjorn's voice boomed through the hall. "Friends, neighbors, tonight we feast in honor of the old gods who have shown us favor." He stood at the head of the main table, a goblet raised high. I noticed with a chill that he alone abstained from the meal, his plate untouched before him. "But let us not forget," Bjorn continued, his eyes sweeping the room, "that such gifts come with a price. Eric and Leif paid that price, so that we might live." A hush fell over the gathering. Helga, seated near Bjorn, spoke up. "What do you mean, Elder? What happened to them?" Bjorn's smile was beatific and utterly terrifying. "They were chosen, my dear. Chosen to serve the Old Ones directly. Their sacrifice ensures our survival." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I saw confusion, fear, but also acceptance. The hunger had been too great, the desperation too deep. Even this, it seemed, could be rationalized if it meant full bellies and warm hearths. As the feast continued, I slipped away, needing air that wasn't thick with the scent of roasting meat and unquestioning gratitude. Outside, the night was clear, stars glittering coldly overhead. I leaned against a wall, drawing in deep breaths of frigid air. "It's a bit overwhelming, isn't it?" I started at the voice, turning to find Gunnar, our chief, standing nearby. His face was gaunt, but his eyes shone with a fervor that unsettled me. "Gunnar," I nodded, choosing my words carefully. "It's a lot to take in." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Bjorn has shown us the way, the old ways. I was skeptical at first, but now—" He gestured towards the great hall. "Now I see the truth of it." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. "And what truth is that?" Gunnar's eyes met mine, and I saw in them a fanaticism that hadn't been there before our journey. That survival requires sacrifice, that the gods are real and hungry, and if we feed them, they will feed us. Before I could respond, a commotion from within the hall drew our attention. We rushed back inside to find a crowd gathered around one of the tables. As we approached, the group parted, revealing a young boy, Ivar, who had been on death's door when we left. But the child who stood before us now was the picture of health. His cheeks were rosy, his eyes bright. He laughed as he devoured another piece of meat, strength evident in every movement. "A miracle," someone whispered. "The gods truly smile upon us." I caught Bjorn's eye across the room. The old man nodded slightly, a knowing smile playing at his lips. I felt my stomach lurch, remembering the unsettling ease of our hunt, the strange mists, the disappearance of Eric and Leif. What price had truly been paid for this miracle? As the night wore on, more stories of miraculous recoveries spread through the hall. Children who had been weak with hunger now ran and played. Elders whose coughs had rattled their frail bodies now stood straight and strong. Yet with each tale of renewal, I noticed changes in Bjorn. His skin grew paler, his eyes more sunken. He moved with a stiffness that belied his earlier vigor. When he thought no one was looking, I saw him clutch at his chest, a grimace of pain flashing across his features. Near midnight, I slipped out once more, unable to bear the continuing celebrations. As I walked the empty paths between houses, movement caught my eye. Strange marks appeared in the snow, not the tracks of any animal I recognized. They led towards the edge of the village where our meager livestock was kept. Following the trail, I rounded a corner and froze. There, illuminated by the moonlight, stood a figure. It was vaguely human in shape but wrong in every detail. Its limbs were too long, its movements too fluid. As I watched, paralyzed, it reached into the pen and pulled out a struggling sheep. The creature's mouth opened, far wider than any human mouth could. and in one impossible motion, swallowed the animal whole. A strangled gasp escaped me, and the thing's head snapped in my direction. For a moment, we stared at each other. Then, with a motion almost like a bow, it melted into the shadows, leaving nothing but disturbed snow and a missing sheep as evidence of its presence. I stumbled back to my house, mind reeling. Sleep eluded me, and as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, I made a decision. I had to confront Bjorn to understand what forces he had unleashed upon our village. But as I approached his hut, I heard voices. Peering through a crack in the door, I saw Bjorn hunched over that cursed stone idol. His words drifted out to me, chilling me to my core. "Soon," he muttered, his voice raspy and weak. "Soon the balance will be restored. The old ones grow stronger with each passing night. Soon, very soon, they will walk among us once more." I backed away, my heart pounding. The feast, the miraculous recoveries, the strange creature in the night, all pieces of a terrifying puzzle. Bjorn had brought something back with us from those frozen peaks, something ancient and hungry. And Frosthaven, in its desperation, was embracing it with open arms. As I walked back towards the center of the village, a child's laughter rang out, bright, healthy, and utterly chilling in the context of what I now knew. The price of plenty, it seemed, was far higher than any of us could have imagined, and I feared we had only begun to pay it. The change came suddenly, as if winter itself had grown weary of its rain. One morning I awoke to the unfamiliar sound of dripping water. Stepping outside, I blinked in disbelief at the scene before me. The snow that had blanketed our village for months was retreating, revealing patches of sodden earth beneath. The air carried a hint of warmth, a promise of life returning. "It's a miracle," I heard someone shout. Villagers emerged from their homes, faces turned up to the watery sunlight breaking through the clouds. Astrid appeared at my side, her eyes wide with wonder. "Have you ever seen anything like it? Spring, arriving so early?" I forced a smile, but unease churned in my gut. This sudden thaw felt as unnatural as the abundance we'd brought back from the frozen peaks. "It's remarkable," I managed. As the day progressed, the transformation accelerated. Snow melted at an impossible rate, revealing green shoots pushing through the earth. Trees that had stood bare and lifeless now sprouted tender buds. The very air seemed charged with vitality. I made my way to the village outskirts, where our hunters were preparing for an expedition. Gunnar stood among them, his face flushed with excitement. "Ah, there you are," he called out as I approached. "Come to join the hunt?" I shook my head. I thought the game was plentiful now. Why the need for a hunting party? Gunnar's smile widened, an almost feverish gleam in his eyes. "Oh, you wouldn't believe it if I told you. The forest is teeming with life. It's as if the animals are offering themselves to us." A chill ran down my spine, remembering the spectral beasts we'd encountered in the misty valleys of the frozen peaks. "That doesn't strike you as odd?" Gunnar clapped a hand on my shoulder, his grip uncomfortably tight. "Odd? It's a blessing. The old ways are working, my friend. Bjorn has shown us the path to prosperity." As if summoned by his name, Bjorn emerged from the tree line. He moved with a grace that belied his years, but I noticed a pallor to his skin, a hollowness to his cheeks that hadn't been there before. "Ah, our hero returns," Gunnar exclaimed. "What news from the forest, Elder?" Bjorn's smile was thin, his eyes feverishly bright. "The gods are pleased with us," he said, his voice carrying an undercurrent of something I couldn't quite place. "They have blessed our lands with abundance." The hunters cheered, but I couldn't shake the feeling of wrongness that permeated the air. As they departed, I found myself alone with Bjorn. The old man turned to me, his gaze piercing. "You seem troubled," he said softly. "Do you not rejoice in our good fortune?" I chose my words carefully. It's a lot to take in. This sudden change, the plentiful game, it doesn't feel natural. Bjorn's laugh was dry, almost brittle. Natural? What is natural, my boy? The endless winter that nearly killed us all? No, this is the true order of things. The old ways restored. Before I could press further, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the misty forest. I stood there for a long moment, the sound of birdsong and new growth all around me, feeling more isolated than I had in the depths of winter. As I made my way back to the village, I passed by Bjorn's hut. A flicker of movement caught my eye, and I found myself drawn to the window. Inside, I saw the old man hunched over a table, that accursed stone idol before him. His lips moved in silent prayer or incantation, his fingers tracing the alien symbols carved into its surface. The longer I watched, the more certain I became that the idol was changing. The runes seemed to writhe and shift, and for a moment, I could have sworn I saw a face forming in the stone, its mouth open in a silent scream. I stumbled back, my heart pounding. As I turned to flee, I collided with someone. Helga, the healer. "By the gods, you startled me," she exclaimed, then lowered her voice. "What were you doing, spying on Bjorn?" I grabbed her arm, pulling her away from the hut. "Helga, something's not right. This thaw, the abundance, it's all connected to that thing Bjorn brought back from the mountains." Helga's face grew serious. "I know. I've seen things. Shadows moving at night, animals acting strangely. And the villagers." She trailed off, her eyes darting around nervously. "What about them?" I pressed. She leaned in close, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're changing, not just getting healthier, but different. I've treated wounds that heal too quickly, seen strength that no human should possess." A commotion from the village square interrupted us. We hurried towards the sound, pushing through a gathering crowd. At the center, a young man, Einar, was demonstrating feats of strength that defied belief. He lifted massive logs with ease, his muscles rippling unnaturally beneath his skin. "The gods have blessed me," Einar shouted, his voice carrying a resonance that sent shivers down my spine. "They have made me strong." The crowd cheered, but I noticed a few faces that mirrored my own unease. Helga clutched my arm, her fingers digging in painfully. "This isn't right," she murmured. "We're becoming something else." As night fell, I found myself unable to sleep. The sounds of the village had changed, no longer the quiet of a community at rest, but a low, constant hum of activity. Slipping out of bed, careful not to wake Astrid, I made my way to the edge of the forest. The mist that had lingered all day had thickened, twisting between the trees in unnatural patterns. As I watched, I saw shapes moving within it. Not animals, not anything I could name. They flitted just at the edge of vision, always disappearing when I tried to focus on them. A twig snapped behind me, and I whirled to find a small figure standing there. It was Ingrid, the chief's young daughter, her eyes wide and unfocused. "Ingrid, what are you doing out here?" I asked, moving towards her. She didn't seem to hear me, her gaze fixed on the misty forest. "They're calling me," she said, her voice dreamy and distant. "The old ones, they want to play." Before I could react, she darted past me, running into the mist-shrouded trees. I called out, giving chase, but the forest seemed to shift around me, paths appearing and disappearing. Ingrid's laughter echoed through the trees, growing fainter until it faded entirely. Panic rising in my throat, I stumbled back towards the village. I had to raise the alarm, to organize a search party. But as I burst into the square, I froze at the sight before me. Villagers moved through the night, their eyes glazed and unfocused. They converged on the center of the square, where Bjorn stood atop a makeshift altar. The stone idol sat before him, pulsing with an unholy light. "Come, my children," Bjorn intoned, his voice carrying an otherworldly resonance. "Come and receive the blessings of the old ones. They hunger for your devotion, your very essence. In return, they offer power beyond imagining." I watched in horror as villagers approached the altar one by one. Bjorn touched the idol to their foreheads, and each time a visible change swept over them. Their bodies twisted, grew stronger, more other. In that moment, I knew with terrible certainty that we had not brought salvation back from the frozen peaks. We had brought damnation, a creeping transformation that would remake us all in the image of something ancient and hungry. As Bjorn's gaze swept the crowd, his eyes met mine. A smile spread across his face, no longer even attempting to appear human. "Ah, there you are, my skeptic," he called out. "Come, it's time for you to embrace the new order. The old ways have returned, and Frosthaven will lead the world into a glorious new age." I turned and ran, my feet carrying me towards home, towards Astrid. We had to leave to warn others of what was happening here. But even as I fled, I could hear Bjorn's laughter echoing behind me, and the mist from the forest began to creep into the village streets, bringing with it shadows of things that should not be. The thaw had come to Frosthaven, melting away not just the snow, but the very fabric of our reality. And in its wake, something ancient and terrible was awakening. The pale light of dawn found me pacing the floor of my home, my mind racing with the horrors I had witnessed the night before. Astrid watched me with worried eyes, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "We have to do something," I muttered, more to myself than to her. "We can't just sit by and watch as our entire village is transformed." Astrid stood, placing a gentle hand on my arm. "What can we do? Bjorn has the support of the chief, of most of the village. They see him as a savior." I turned to her, grasping her shoulders. "But can't you see? This isn't salvation. It's corruption. We're losing our humanity, Astrid. And for what? A few months of plenty after a harsh winter?" A knock at the door interrupted us. I tensed, fearing it might be Bjorn or one of his newly transformed followers. But when I opened it, I found Helga standing there, her face drawn with worry. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me into the house. "Things are worse than we thought." I closed the door, checking to make sure no one had seen her enter. "What's happened?" Helga sank into a chair, her normally steady hands shaking slightly. "It's not just the villagers changing, the land itself, it's wrong. The plants that have sprung up overnight, I've never seen their like before. And the animals," she shuddered. "They're not natural. Not anymore." Astrid gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "What do you mean, not natural?" Helga's eyes met mine, and I saw real fear there. "I saw a deer this morning. At least I think it was a deer. It had too many eyes, and its antlers. They moved like tentacles." A heavy silence fell over the room. The horror of what was happening to our home, to our people, seemed to press in on us from all sides. Finally, I spoke. "We need to confront Bjorn, to find out exactly what he's done, what he's unleashed on us all." Astrid gripped my arm. "No, you've seen what's happening to people. What if he does the same to you?" I covered her hand with mine, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. "We can't just do nothing. If we don't act now, there might not be anything left of Frosthaven to save." Helga nodded grimly. "He's right. And we're not alone. There are others who are resistant to Bjorn's influence. We've been meeting in secret, trying to make sense of all this." "How many?" I asked, a spark of hope kindling in my chest. "A dozen, maybe more," Helga replied. "Enough to make a stand if it comes to that." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "All right, let's go confront Bjorn. But first we need to gather everyone who's still themselves." We spent the next hour moving carefully through the village, gathering those who shared our concerns. It was a tense process, never knowing if the next person we approached would be one of Bjorn's transformed followers. But slowly, our group grew. As we neared Bjorn's hut, a sense of foreboding settled over us. The air seemed thicker here, charged with an energy that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Look," whispered Eric, one of the younger men in our group. He pointed to the ground, where strange tracks led away from Bjorn's dwelling. They were unlike any animal prints I'd ever seen, a mix of cloven hooves and what looked disturbingly like human footprints. He's not here, I realized aloud. But where would he go? Helga's face paled. The old stone circle. It's where the village elders used to perform rituals back in the old days. If Bjorn is trying to awaken something, that's where he'd do it. We approached the hut cautiously. The door stood slightly ajar, creaking softly in the breeze. I pushed it open, my heart pounding in my chest. The interior was a scene of ordered chaos. Books and scrolls littered every surface, many in languages I didn't recognize. Strange symbols were carved into the walls and floor, forming patterns that hurt my eyes if I looked at them too long. But it was the center of the room that drew our attention. A crude altar had been set up, dark stains marring its surface. And there, sitting atop it, was the stone idol I'd seen Bjorn with before. "Don't touch it," Helga warned as some of our group moved closer. "There's a wrongness about it. Can't you feel it?" I could. The air around the idol seemed to warp and twist, as if reality itself was rejecting its presence. "We need to destroy it," Eric said, reaching for a nearby axe. "No," I grabbed his arm. "We don't know what that might do. For all we know, it could make things worse." As we argued, a low rumble shook the hut. Dust fell from the rafters, and in the distance we heard what sounded like chanting. "The stone circle," Helga gasped. "We're too late. He's already started." We raced through the village, ignoring the strange looks from those we passed. As we neared the outskirts, the chanting grew louder. It was in no language I recognized, the sounds guttural and inhuman. The stone circle stood atop a small hill, ancient monoliths arranged in a pattern whose meaning had been lost to time. Or so we thought. Now, as we crested the hill, we saw that the stones were changing. They pulsed with an inner light, the runes carved into their surfaces writhing and shifting. And there, in the center of it all, stood Bjorn. But he was Bjorn no longer. His body had grown, twisted into something that barely resembled a man. Extra limbs sprouted from his torso and his face. I turned away, unable to look directly at the horror it had become. Around him, villagers knelt in supplication. Their bodies were changing too, morphing into forms that bridged the gap between human and something else. "Behold," Bjorn's voice boomed, no longer anything close to human. "The old ones return. Their blessing flows through us, remaking us in their image." I stepped forward, my voice shaking but determined. "Bjorn, stop this madness. Can't you see what you're doing to our people, to our home?" His head swiveled towards me, too many eyes blinking in unison. "Madness? This is salvation. The old gods offer us power beyond imagining. Why cling to your frail humanity when you could be so much more?" "Because it's who we are," I shouted back. "Our humanity isn't a weakness to be discarded. It's what makes us who we are." Bjorn laughed, the sound sending shivers down my spine. "Such limited thinking, but you'll understand soon enough. The change is coming for all of you, whether you embrace it or not." As if to emphasize his point, the ground began to shake. Cracks appeared in the earth, glowing with an otherworldly light. From these fissures, things began to emerge, creatures out of nightmare, all tentacles and teeth and too many eyes. "The veil thins," Bjorn intoned. "Soon the old ones will walk among us once more, and we, their faithful servants, will rule alongside them." Panic gripped our small group. Some turned to flee, only to find our escape cut off by villagers who were more beast than human now. "What do we do?" Astrid whispered, clutching my arm. I looked around desperately, searching for anything that might help us. My eyes fell on the stone idol, which Bjorn had placed at the center of the circle. It pulsed in time with the chanting, the focal point of whatever dark ritual was unfolding. An idea formed, desperate, possibly suicidal, but the only chance we had. "Helga," I hissed, "you said the idol was a conduit, right? A bridge between worlds?" She nodded, her eyes wide with fear and understanding. "Yes, but..." "Then that's our target," I said. If we destroy it, maybe we can stop all of this. Or make it infinitely worse, she warned. I grimaced. Do we have a choice? As Bjorn continued his chant, growing louder and more frenzied, we formulated a hasty plan. Half of our group would create a distraction, drawing the attention of Bjorn and his followers. The rest of us would make a dash for the idol. Ready? I asked, receiving grim nods in return. Now! Chaos erupted. Those creating the distraction charged forward, shouting and brandishing whatever weapons they had. Bjorn's followers moved to intercept them, their twisted forms giving them inhuman strength. In the confusion, I sprinted towards the center of the circle, Helga and Eric close behind. Bjorn saw us coming, his monstrous face contorting in rage. Stop them, he roared. They must not touch the sacred relic. Hands grabbed at me, claws raking my skin. I pushed through, my eyes fixed on the idol. Just a few more steps. A tentacle wrapped around my ankle, yanking me off my feet. I hit the ground hard, the breath driven from my lungs. Looking up, I saw one of the nightmare creatures looming over me, its maw opening to reveal rows upon rows of teeth. No! Astrid's voice rang out. She appeared from nowhere, swinging a burning torch. The creature recoiled, its flesh sizzling where the flames touched it. I scrambled to my feet, locking eyes with Astrid for a brief, intense moment. Then I was running again, closing the distance to the idol. Bjorn's chanting reached a fever pitch. The air itself seemed to tear, revealing glimpses of a realm beyond, a place of writhing darkness and impossible geometries. My hands closed around the stone idol. It burned cold, sending jolts of pain up my arms, but I held on, lifting it high above my head. Nada Kronve, Bjorn screamed, words of power that made reality itself shudder. With every ounce of strength I had left, I brought the idol crashing down onto one of the ancient stones. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like the world itself breaking, the idol shattered. Light exploded outward, blinding in its intensity. I felt myself being thrown backward, tumbling end over end. The last thing I heard before darkness took me was Bjorn's howl of rage and despair. When I came to, the world was silent. The chanting had stopped. The creatures were gone. I pushed myself up, looking around in disbelief. The stone circle was in ruins, the ancient monoliths toppled and broken. Where Bjorn had stood, there was only a scorched patch of earth. And all around, villagers lay unconscious, but human once more. Astrid found me, pulling me into a fierce embrace. Is it over? She whispered. I held her tight, my eyes scanning the devastation around us. I don't know, I admitted. But whatever Bjorn started, whatever he was trying to bring into our world, I think we've stopped it, for now. As the sun rose over Frosthaven, casting long shadows across the ruined stone circle, I knew our ordeal was far from over. We had unveiled a truth too terrible to fully comprehend, and in doing so, had changed the course of our village and perhaps the world, forever. But we had survived. We were still human, and as I looked at the faces of those around me, battered, scared, but alive, I felt a glimmer of hope. Whatever came next, we would face it together, holding on to our humanity in the face of forces that would see it destroyed. The truth had been unveiled. Now, the real work of rebuilding and safeguarding our world against the darkness that lurked beyond could begin. The days following the destruction of the stone idol were a blur of exhaustion and uneasy relief. As the villagers of Frosthaven slowly regained consciousness, confusion and fear reigned. Many had no memory of what had transpired, while others were haunted by fragmented recollections of their transformation. I found myself at the center of it all, alongside Astrid and the small group who had stood against Bjorn's madness. We worked tirelessly to care for the injured, to restore some semblance of order to our shattered community. On the third day, as the sun rose over the ruins of the stone circle, I stood with Gunnar, our chief, surveying the damage. I still can't believe it, Gunnar muttered, shaking his head. Bjorn, he was like a father to me. How could he have done this to us? I placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling the weight of leadership that now rested solely upon him. He was deceived, Gunnar. We all were, to some extent. The promise of abundance after such hardship, it was a temptation few could resist. Gunnar's eyes met mine, filled with a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. And you? How did you resist? I hesitated, searching for the right words. I saw the wrongness of it from the beginning. The unnatural ease of our hunt, the sudden thaw. It all felt like a violation of the natural order. A grim smile tugged at Gunnar's lips. Perhaps we should have listened to your doubts earlier. But what's done is done. Now we must focus on rebuilding. As if on cue, Helga approached, her arms full of medicinal herbs. Chief, we're running low on supplies. The changes to the forest. Many of our usual plants are gone, replaced by things I've never seen before. Gunnar frowned. Are they usable? Helga shook her head. I'm not sure. Some seem to have healing properties, but others, there's a wrongness to them. We need to be cautious. I nodded in agreement. We should organize an expedition, map out the changes to the land, see what resources we still have available. Agreed, Gunnar said, but we must be careful. We don't know what other effects Bjorn's ritual might have had on the surrounding area. As we discussed the logistics of the expedition, a commotion arose from the village center. We hurried toward the sound, pushing through a gathering crowd. In the middle of the square stood Eric, one of the younger men who had helped us confront Bjorn. But something was wrong. His body seemed to be flickering, shifting between his human form and something other. Help me, Eric cried out, his voice distorting. It's not over. The change. It's still inside us. Panic rippled through the crowd. I pushed forward, reaching out to Eric. Stay calm, I urged. We'll figure this out. But even as I spoke, I saw others beginning to show signs of the transformation. Villagers cried out in fear and pain as their bodies betrayed them, morphing into grotesque shapes before snapping back to human form. Helga grabbed my arm, her face pale. The idol, destroying it didn't stop the change. It just paused it somehow. Realization dawned, cold and terrible. We didn't end it, I whispered. We just bought ourselves time. The next few hours were chaos. We worked to isolate those showing signs of transformation, setting up a makeshift quarantine in the Great Hall. Helga and her apprentices moved among the afflicted, doing what they could to ease their suffering. As night fell, I found myself outside the hall, slumped against the wall in exhaustion. Astrid sat beside me, her head resting on my shoulder. What are we going to do? She asked softly. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on me. I don't know, but we can't give up. There has to be a way to stop this, to reverse what Bjorn started. A thought struck me, and I sat up straighter. The books in Bjorn's hut, the scrolls, there might be answers there. Astrid's eyes widened. But you said they were in languages you didn't recognize. True, I admitted. But Bjorn must have been able to read them. Maybe if we study them, we can decipher. My words were cut off by a scream from inside the hall. We rushed in to find Eric convulsing on the floor, his body shifting rapidly between forms. Hold him down, Helga shouted, pushing through the crowd with a poultice in her hands. But as we reached for Eric, his body gave one final violent spasm, and then stilled. When he opened his eyes, they were no longer human. A low, guttural sound emerged from his throat, and he lunged at the nearest person. Chaos erupted. The transformed Eric tore through the crowd with inhuman strength. Others, triggered by his full transformation, began to change as well. Everyone out, I shouted, helping Astrid herd people towards the exit. We need to contain them. As the last of the unaffected villagers fled, we slammed the doors shut, barring them from the outside. The sounds of destruction from within the hall were terrifying. Gunnar appeared at my side, his face grim. "What now?" I took a deep breath, trying to think clearly despite the panic threatening to overwhelm me. "We need to secure the village. Set up guards, make sure none of the transformed can escape, and then we find a cure," Helga finished, her voice firm with determination. The next few days were a blur of activity. We fortified the village as best we could, setting up patrols and warning systems. I spent every spare moment in Bjorn's hut, poring over his books and scrolls, trying to make sense of the arcane languages and symbols. On the fifth night, as I sat surrounded by piles of indecipherable texts, Astrid entered the hut. "You need to rest," she said softly, placing a hand on my shoulder. I shook my head, not looking up from the scroll in front of me. "I can't." Every moment I waste could mean another villager lost to the transformation. Astrid knelt beside me, gently taking the scroll from my hands. "And if you drive yourself to exhaustion, who will lead us? Who will find the cure?" I met her gaze, seeing the love and concern there. With a sigh, I nodded. "You're right, I feel so helpless." As we stepped outside, a cool breeze carried the scent of the forest. But there was something else on the wind. A faint, ethereal melody that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Do you hear that?" I asked, straining my ears. Astrid nodded, her eyes wide. "It's beautiful. And terrifying." The melody grew stronger, and with it came a shimmering in the air. Before our astonished eyes, a figure began to take shape, a woman of unearthly beauty, her form seeming to shift and change like mist. "Who? What are you?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. The figure smiled, a gesture both comforting and unsettling. When she spoke, her voice seemed to come from inside my own mind. "I am Erdis, guardian of the veil between worlds. Your actions have drawn my attention, mortals." I swallowed hard, finding my voice. "Are you one of the old ones that Bjorn sought to summon?" Erdis's laugh was like the tinkling of crystal. "No, child. I am of a different order entirely. The beings Bjorn foolishly tried to call forth are anathema to me and my kind." Hope surged within me. "Then, can you help us? Can you undo what Bjorn has done?" The ethereal being's expression grew serious. "The damage done is not easily undone. The veil between worlds has been weakened, and the corruption spreads even now." My heart sank, but Erdis continued. "However, all is not lost. There is a way to mend the veil and cleanse your people of the corruption. But it will require great sacrifice." "Anything," I said without hesitation. "Tell us what we must do." Erdis's form shimmered, and suddenly we were no longer standing in the village. We found ourselves in a vast, starlit void, with swirling patterns of energy all around us. "Behold the tapestry of reality," Erdis said, her voice echoing through the cosmos. "What Bjorn tore asunder must be rewoven, but the thread needed for such work, it is the essence of life itself." Understanding dawned, cold and terrible. "You mean a life freely given," Erdis confirmed. "A soul pure enough to mend the veil and drive back the corruption. But know this, whoever undertakes this task may be lost forever, their essence scattered across realities." Astrid gripped my hand tightly. "There has to be another way," she pleaded. Erdis's expression was sympathetic but unyielding. "I'm sorry, child. The laws that govern the cosmos are immutable. Balance must be restored." With a gesture, the cosmic vista faded, and we found ourselves back in Frosthaven. But now I saw the village with new eyes, the tendrils of corruption spreading through the earth, the weakening barriers between our world and the realm of nightmares Bjorn had sought to unleash. "How long do we have?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "The next full moon," Erdis replied, "when the veil is thinnest. If the ritual is not completed by then, the corruption will become irreversible." With those ominous words, Erdis's form began to fade. Choose wisely, mortals. The fate of far more than just your village hangs in the balance. As the ethereal being vanished entirely, Astrid and I stood in stunned silence. The weight of the choice before us was almost unbearable. Finally, Astrid spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are we going to do?" I looked out over the village, seeing the fear and hope in the eyes of our people. The sounds of the transformed, still trapped in the great hall, echoed in the night. "We tell them the truth," I said, my resolve hardening. "All of it. And then we let our people decide. This choice, this sacrifice, it has to be freely made." As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, I steeled myself for the difficult days ahead. We had a chance to save our people, to mend the veil between worlds. But the cost would be higher than any of us could have imagined. The final battle for Frosthaven's soul, and perhaps the fate of reality itself, was about to begin. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that not all of us would survive to see its end. The village square was packed, an air of tense anticipation hanging over the crowd. I stood on the makeshift platform, my heart pounding as I surveyed the faces of my friends and neighbors. Some showed fear, others hope, but all were united in their need for answers. Gunnar stepped forward, raising his hands for silence. "People of Frosthaven," he began, his voice carrying across the square, "we have called you here today because we face a crisis unlike any in our history, but we also have hope." He nodded to me, and I took a deep breath before addressing the crowd. "Many of you have seen the changes afflicting our people, the strangeness creeping into our land. What I'm about to tell you will be hard to believe, but I swear on my life that every word is true." Over the next hour, I laid out everything: Bjorn's ritual, the old ones he sought to summon, the corruption spreading through our village and the surrounding forest. When I reached the part about Eirdis and the sacrifice needed to mend the veil, a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. "You're saying one of us has to die?" a voice called out. It was Lars, the blacksmith, his face twisted in disbelief. I shook my head. "Not just die, Lars. Whoever undertakes this task will have their very essence scattered across realities. They may cease to exist entirely." Murmurs of fear and anger swept through the gathering. I saw people turning to each other, whispering furiously. Some looked ready to flee, others seemed on the verge of violence. Astrid stepped up beside me, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "We know this is a terrible choice, but if we do nothing, we'll all be lost to the corruption. Our entire village, perhaps our entire world, will fall to darkness." Helga joined us on the platform. "I've seen the effects of the corruption up close. Those who fully transform, they're not themselves anymore. They become something monstrous, driven only by hunger and rage." A tense silence fell over the square. Then, slowly, Ingrid, the young girl I had seen running into the mist that fateful night, pushed her way to the front. "I'll do it," she said, her voice small but determined. "I'll make the sacrifice." "No." Her father surged forward, pulling her back. "She's just a child. You can't ask this of her." I held up my hands, trying to calm the rising panic. "No one is being asked to decide right now. We have until the next full moon to make our choice, but it must be a choice freely made, by someone pure of heart and strong of will." As the crowd dispersed, breaking into small groups to discuss this earth-shattering news, I felt the weight of leadership pressing down on me more heavily than ever. Gunnar approached, his face grim. "You did well," he said quietly. "But this knowledge, it could tear us apart." I nodded, watching as families huddled together, some in tears, others in heated debate. We had to tell them the truth. They deserve to know what we're facing. Over the next few days, a strange atmosphere settled over Frosthaven. People went about their daily tasks with a kind of desperate intensity, as if trying to cling to normalcy in the face of the impossible choice before us. But underneath it all, I could sense the tension building, like a storm about to break. I spent my time divided between studying Bjorn's texts, hoping to find some alternative to the terrible sacrifice Eirdis had described, and preparing for the ritual itself. Helga and I pored over ancient scrolls, trying to decipher the complex magical formulas that would be needed to mend the veil. On the third night after the meeting, as I sat in Bjorn's hut surrounded by arcane tomes, Astrid burst in, her face pale with worry. "You need to come quickly," she said, grabbing my arm. "There's a fight in the square." We raced through the village, the sounds of shouting growing louder as we approached. In the center of the square, two groups faced off, one led by Lars the blacksmith, the other by Eric's father, Sven. "We can't trust this magic," Lars was shouting, his face red with anger. "It's what got us into this mess in the first place." Sven pushed forward, grief and determination etched on his features. "And what's your alternative? Let my son and the others rot in that hall, turned into monsters? At least this gives us a chance." As the two men grappled, others joined in, the conflict threatening to engulf the entire gathering. I pushed my way into the center, Gunnar at my side. "Enough!" Gunnar's voice boomed out, momentarily stunning the crowd into silence. "Is this how we face our greatest challenge, by turning on each other?" I seized the moment of quiet. "I know you're afraid, we all are. But this is exactly what the corruption wants, to divide us, to make us weak." Lars turned to me, his eyes blazing. "And who put you in charge, eh? Why should we listen to you?" Before I could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. "Because he's the only one who's been fighting this from the beginning." Heads turned to see Helga making her way through the crowd. She stood beside me, her gaze sweeping over the villagers. "I've known something was wrong since Bjorn returned from the mountains. But it was him," she pointed at me, "who had the courage to stand up and do something about it." The fight seemed to go out of Lars, his shoulders slumping. I'm just scared," he admitted. "For my family, for all of us." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "We all are, Lars, but we can't let that fear control us. We're stronger together." As the crowd began to disperse, the immediate crisis averted, Gunnar pulled me aside. "This can't go on," he said quietly. "The longer we wait, the more chances there are for things to spiral out of control." I nodded, a plan forming in my mind. "You're right. It's time we took action. Gather the village elders. We need to prepare for a journey." The next morning, as dawn broke over Frosthaven, a small group assembled at the village gates. Gunnar, Helga, Astrid, and I stood before the gathered crowd, packs on our backs and determination in our eyes. "People of Frosthaven," Gunnar addressed them, his voice strong despite the early hour. "We go now to seek answers, to explore the changes in our land and perhaps find a way to combat this corruption without the need for sacrifice." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, hope, fear, and everything in between. I stepped forward. "We don't know what we'll find out there. The forest has changed, become dangerous in ways we don't yet understand. But we go for all of you, for the future of our village." As we prepared to depart, Ingrid pushed her way to the front once more. This time her father didn't hold her back. "Take this," she said, pressing a small, carved wooden figure into my hand. "For luck. And if you don't find another way, remember that I'm ready." I knelt down, meeting her eyes. "Your courage does you credit, Ingrid, but this burden isn't yours to bear alone. We'll find a way, together." With final embraces and words of encouragement from our friends and families, we set out into the transformed forest. The familiar paths we had known all our lives were now twisted, overgrown with plants that seemed to shift and move when viewed from the corner of the eye. As we walked, Helga pointed out changes in the flora and fauna. "Look there," she said, indicating a cluster of mushrooms that glowed with an unnatural light. "I've never seen anything like it. And yet, there's a pattern to the changes. It's as if the forest is being reshaped according to some alien design." We pushed deeper into the wilderness, the very air seeming to thicken around us. Strange sounds echoed in the distance, calls of creatures that should not exist in this world. More than once we caught glimpses of shadowy forms flitting between the trees, always just out of clear sight. As night fell, we made camp in a small clearing. The stars above seemed wrong somehow, as if the very constellations had shifted. We sat around a small fire, its light creating a fragile barrier against the encroaching darkness. "What exactly are we hoping to find out here?" Astrid asked, her voice low. I stared into the flames, trying to put my instincts into words. "I'm not sure, but Bjorn's ritual tapped into something ancient, something that existed long before our village. If we can understand it, maybe we can find a way to undo it without the need for sacrifice." Gunnar nodded slowly. "And if we can't? If Irdis was right about the price that must be paid?" A heavy silence fell over our small group. Finally, I spoke, my voice barely above a whisper. "Then we'll face that choice together as a village. But I refuse to believe that's our only option. There has to be another way." As if in response to my words, a haunting melody drifted through the trees. The same ethereal music we had heard when Irdis appeared. We all stood, weapons at the ready, peering into the darkness beyond our campfire. "Show yourself," I called out, trying to keep the tremor from my voice. The music grew louder, and the air before us began to shimmer. But instead of Irdis's elegant form, a new figure took shape. A being of swirling mist and starlight, its features constantly shifting and reforming. "Who seeks to unravel the tapestry of fate?" The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, resonating in our very bones. I stepped forward, my heart pounding. "We do. We seek a way to save our people without the need for sacrifice." The being's form solidified slightly, taking on a vaguely humanoid shape. "Brave mortals to venture so far from your home. But do you truly understand what forces you meddle with?" Helga moved to stand beside me. "We understand enough to know that what's happening is wrong. The corruption spreading through our land, the transformation of our people, it has to be stopped." The misty figure seemed to consider this. "Perhaps. But the balance of realities is a delicate thing. To change the course set in motion may require more than you are prepared to give." "Tell us," Gunnar demanded. "What price must we pay to save our village?" The being's form rippled, and suddenly we were surrounded by swirling visions, glimpses of other worlds, other possibilities. I saw versions of Frosthaven untouched by corruption, but also versions consumed by it, reduced to ash and ruin. "The threads of fate are many," the figure intoned. "To reweave them requires not just sacrifice but understanding. You must journey to the heart of the corruption, to the place where the veil first tore. There, and only there, can the damage be undone." As quickly as they had appeared, the visions faded. We found ourselves back in the clearing, the misty being already beginning to dissipate. "Wait," I called out. "Where is this place? How do we find it?" But the figure was gone, leaving only a whisper on the wind. "Follow the path of the twisted stars. Seek the gate between worlds. But beware, what lies beyond may break more than just your body." As silence fell once more over the forest, we looked at each other, equal parts hope and trepidation in our eyes. We had come seeking answers, and while we had found some, they only led to more questions. "Well," Astrid said, attempting a smile, "at least we have a direction now." I nodded, my mind racing with the implications of what we had seen and heard. We press on at first light. Whatever lies ahead, whatever trials we must face, we face them together. As we settled back around the campfire, I couldn't shake the feeling that our journey was only beginning. The fate of Frosthaven, perhaps of all realities, hung in the balance, and somewhere out there, beyond the twisted forest and the veil between worlds, lay the answers we sought. The gathering storm of our destiny approached. All we could do now was meet it head-on, with courage, determination, and the hope that somehow, against all odds, we would find a way to save our home and our people from the darkness that threatened to consume us all. Dawn broke over the transformed forest, casting an eerie, shifting light through the twisted canopy. As our small group broke camp, the weight of our mission hung heavy in the air. The mysterious being's words echoed in my mind. Follow the path of the twisted stars. Helga approached, her brow furrowed in concentration. I've been thinking about what that creature said. The twisted stars. It must be referring to the changed constellations we've been seeing. I nodded, scanning the fading night sky. But how do we follow something so intangible? Gunnar joined us, his weathered face set with determination. We need higher ground. If we can get a clear view of the sky, maybe we can spot a pattern. With agreement from Astrid, we set off, pushing deeper into the strange forest. The familiar paths of our homeland were now alien territory, with vegetation that seemed to shift and breathe when we weren't looking directly at it. Strange calls echoed in the distance, setting our nerves on edge. As we hiked, Astrid fell into step beside me. Do you really think we can find a way to save everyone without someone having to sacrifice themselves? Her voice was low, tinged with both hope and fear. I reached for her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. I have to believe it's possible. The alternative is too terrible to contemplate. Hours passed as we trekked through the increasingly bizarre landscape. Trees grew in impossible shapes, their bark shimmering with otherworldly colors. At one point, we crossed a stream whose water flowed uphill, defying the very laws of nature. As the sun began to set, we finally reached a clearing atop a high hill. The view that greeted us was breathtaking and terrifying in equal measure. The forest stretched out below us, a sea of writhing shadows and pulsing light. And above, by the gods, Gunnar breathed, his eyes wide. The sky was alive with stars, but not the constellations we had known all our lives. These stars moved, swirling in complex patterns that hurt the eyes to follow. And cutting through it all was a ribbon of darkness, a path of negative space that seemed to beckon us onward. That's it, Helga said, her voice filled with awe and trepidation. The path of twisted stars. We made camp there on the hilltop, none of us willing to begin our journey along that impossible celestial road in the dark. As we sat around the fire, the gravity of our situation settled over us like a heavy cloak. What do you think we'll find? Astrid asked, her eyes reflecting the dancing flames. At the end of that path? I shook my head, staring up at the writhing sky. I don't know, but whatever it is, it's our best hope of saving Frosthaven. Gunnar's voice was gruff with emotion. And if we fail? If this journey is for nothing? Helga reached out, placing a hand on his arm. Then we'll have tried. That has to count for something. As the others drifted off to sleep, I took first watch, my mind racing with possibilities and fears. The forest around us pulsed with an otherworldly energy, and more than once I caught glimpses of shadowy forms flitting between the trees at the edge of our camp. When Astrid woke to relieve me, she found me still staring at the twisted stars. You should rest, she said softly, sitting beside me. I turned to her, seeing the concern in her eyes. I keep thinking about everyone back in the village, about Ingrid, and her offer to sacrifice herself. We have to find another way, Astrid. We have to. She leaned her head on my shoulder, her presence a comfort in the strange night. We will. Together. Morning came, though it was hard to tell in the perpetual twilight cast by the roiling sky. We broke camp quickly, eager to begin our journey despite the dangers that surely lay ahead. We follow the dark path, I said, pointing to the ribbon of emptiness that cut through the stellar chaos above. Stay close, and be ready for anything. As we descended the hill, the forest seemed to close in around us. The trees grew denser, their branches intertwining to form a canopy that all but blocked out the sky. Yet somehow the dark path remained visible, a guideline through the madness. Our progress was slow, the terrain growing more treacherous with each step. More than once we had to backtrack to find a way around chasms that appeared out of nowhere, or avoid patches of vegetation that reached out with thorny tendrils to snare the unwary. As we pushed on, the air grew thick and heavy, filled with swirling motes of light that danced just at the edge of vision. Strange whispers echoed in our minds, fragments of alien thoughts that threatened to overwhelm our sanity. "Stay focused," Gunnar growled, his voice anchoring us to reality. "Whatever you hear, whatever you see, remember why we're here." Hours blended into days, though time seemed to have little meaning in this warped realm. We rationed our supplies carefully, but it soon became clear that we would need to forage if we hoped to complete our journey. Helga's knowledge proved invaluable as she identified plants and fungi that were safe to eat, though their effects were often strange. Berries that glowed from within gave us bursts of energy, but left us seeing trails of light with every movement. Mushrooms that pulsed in time with our heartbeats dulled the constant whispers, but made our limbs feel heavy and slow. On what we guessed was the 5th day of our journey, we encountered our first major obstacle. The path led us to the edge of a vast chasm, so deep that we couldn't see the bottom. Mist swirled in its depths, occasionally parting to reveal tantalizing glimpses of other landscapes. Sun-drenched plains, icy tundras, even what looked like the streets of a great city. "It's a rift," Helga said, her voice filled with wonder and fear. "A tear in the fabric of reality itself." I peered over the edge, trying to gauge the distance. "There's no way around. We'll have to find a way across." As if in answer to our dilemma, a bridge began to form before our eyes. It was made of pure starlight, coalescing into a shimmering path that spanned the chasm. Gunnar eyed it warily. "I don't trust it. Anything this convenient has to be a trap." Astrid stepped forward, her face set with determination. "We don't have a choice. Our supplies won't last much longer, and we can't go back now." With trepidation, we began to cross. The bridge felt solid beneath our feet, but each step sent ripples of light cascading out into the void. As we reached the midpoint, the whispers that had plagued us grew louder, more insistent. Suddenly, Helga cried out, clutching her head. I can't block them out." We rushed to her side, but the damage was done. The bridge began to dissolve, the starlight fading like mist in the morning sun. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Helga's arm and pulling her forward. We raced across the disintegrating bridge, each step a gamble as the light beneath our feet flickered and faded. With a final desperate leap, we made it to the other side just as the last of the bridge vanished into nothingness. Panting and shaken, we took stock of our situation. We were alive, but the ordeal had taken its toll. Helga's eyes were wide and unfocused, her breathing rapid and shallow. "What did you hear?" Astrid asked gently, helping Helga to sit up. The healer's voice was barely above a whisper. "Voices. So many voices, screaming, pleading. I saw worlds dying, realities collapsing. And behind it all, something vast and hungry, consuming everything in its path." A chill ran down my spine. "The old ones," I said. "The beings Bjorn tried to summon. They're real, and they're coming." Gunnar's face was grim. "Then we'd better hurry. We might be the only thing standing between them and our world." As Helga recovered, we pressed on, the landscape growing ever stranger. We passed through groves of crystalline trees that chimed with unearthly music, skirted lakes of liquid shadow, and navigated fields of stone formations that rearranged themselves when we looked away. Through it all, we clung to each other and to our purpose. The memory of Frosthaven, of our friends and families waiting for salvation, drove us forward despite the horrors we witnessed. On what we believed to be the 10th day of our journey, we crested a rise and saw our destination at last. In the valley below stood a massive structure, a temple or fortress of impossible geometry. Its spires reached into the swirling sky, seeming to pierce the very fabric of reality. "The gate between worlds," I breathed, remembering the words of the misty being. As we approached, we could see that the structure was not built but grown, its walls pulsing with the same otherworldly energy that permeated the forest. And at its center, visible even from a distance, was a swirling vortex of darkness, a tear in the veil between realities. We made camp one last time, gathering our strength for whatever trials lay ahead. As night fell, or what passed for night in this realm of perpetual twilight, we sat in contemplative silence. Finally, Astrid spoke, her voice soft but determined. "Whatever happens in there, I want you all to know, I'm glad we're facing this together." Gunnar nodded, his usual gruffness softened by emotion. "We've come further than I ever thought possible. Whatever comes next, we face it as one." Helga, still shaken from her experience on the bridge, managed a small smile. "For Frosthaven, for all the worlds that might fall if we fail." I looked at each of them, these brave friends who had journeyed into madness with me. "Tomorrow we enter the gate. We find a way to stop the corruption, to save our home, and we do it without losing ourselves in the process." As we settled in for our final night before facing the unknown, I gazed up at the twisted stars that had guided us here. Whatever lay beyond that gate, whatever cosmic horrors we might face, I knew that together we stood a chance. The fate of Frosthaven, of all realities, hung in the balance. But as I drifted off to sleep, I felt a glimmer of hope. We had come this far against impossible odds. Perhaps, just perhaps, we could find a way to save everything we held dear without paying the ultimate price. Tomorrow, we would step into the heart of the corruption and face our destiny. The final battle for the soul of our world was about to begin. Dawn broke over the twisted landscape, casting an otherworldly glow on the massive structure before us. The gate between worlds loomed, its impossible architecture both beckoning and threatening. As we broke camp for the last time, the air was thick with tension and unspoken fears. "This is it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Whatever lies beyond that gate, we face it together." Gunnar nodded grimly, checking his weapon one last time. "For Frosthaven, for all realities," Helga added, her eyes fixed on the swirling vortex at the center of the structure. Astrid reached out and took my hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "We've come too far to turn back now." With a collective deep breath, we approached the gate. As we drew closer, the very air seemed to vibrate with power. The walls of the structure pulsed with veins of energy, and strange symbols flickered across its surface. At the base of the gate, we found an entrance, a dark archway that seemed to draw in all light around it. Standing before it, I felt a moment of hesitation. What horrors awaited us on the other side? As if sensing my doubt, Astrid spoke up. "Remember why we're here. For our friends, our families, our home. Whatever lies beyond, it can't be worse than losing everything we love." Her words steeled my resolve. With a nod to my companions, I stepped through the archway. The transition was jarring. One moment we were standing in the twisted forest, and the next we were elsewhere. We found ourselves in a vast chamber, its dimensions shifting and changing in ways that defied comprehension. The walls, floor, and ceiling seemed to be made of pure energy, rippling and flowing like liquid starlight. "By the gods," Gunnar breathed, his eyes wide with wonder and fear. Helga stumbled, clutching her head. "The voices, they're so much stronger here. I can feel the weight of countless realities pressing in on my mind." I reached out to steady her, fighting against my own disorientation. "Stay focused, Helga. Remember who you are, why we're here." As our eyes adjusted to the strange environment, we began to make out shapes in the distance. Floating platforms of various sizes drifted through the chamber, connected by bridges of pure light. And at the center of it all, suspended in midair, was a massive orb of swirling darkness. "The heart of the corruption," Astrid whispered, her voice filled with awe and dread. We made our way across the shifting landscape, each step requiring careful concentration. The platforms would appear and disappear seemingly at random, and more than once we nearly lost our footing on the ephemeral bridges. As we drew closer to the central orb, the whispers that had plagued us throughout our journey grew to a deafening roar. Fragments of alien thoughts and emotions bombarded our minds, threatening to overwhelm our sanity. Suddenly, a voice cut through the chaos. Familiar, yet distorted by power beyond mortal comprehension. "You should not have come here, mortals." We turned to see a figure materializing before us. It was Bjorn, or what remained of him. His body was twisted and elongated, his skin translucent and pulsing with otherworldly energy. His eyes, once kind and wise, now blazed with eldritch fire. "Bjorn," I managed, my voice choked with emotion. "What have you done to yourself?" The thing that had once been our elder laughed, the sound reverberating through multiple dimensions. "I have ascended, my child. I have become one with the old ones, seen the truth of all realities." Gunnar stepped forward, his hand on his weapon. "You've brought corruption and suffering to our people. We're here to end this madness." Bjorn's form rippled, growing larger and more monstrous. "End it? You cannot even comprehend what has begun. The old ones stir in their slumber, and soon they will awaken fully. All realities will be consumed, remade in their image." Helga, still struggling against the psychic onslaught, managed to speak. "There has to be a way to stop this, to heal the damage you've done." For a moment, something like regret flickered across Bjorn's inhuman features. "It is too late. The process cannot be reversed, but you could join us. Become one with the infinite, free from the constraints of your limited existence." I felt a pull, a temptation to give in to the cosmic forces swirling around us. But then I thought of Frosthaven, of the people we had left behind, of Ingrid, willing to sacrifice herself to save everyone. "No," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. "We didn't come all this way to surrender. We came to fight." Bjorn's expression hardened, all traces of humanity vanishing from his face. "Then you will die, your essences scattered across 1,000,000 realities." With a gesture, he summoned creatures of pure nightmare, writhing masses of tentacles and eyes, beings of living shadow, things that hurt the mind to look upon directly. They surged towards us, their alien minds pressing against our consciousness. "Stand together," Gunnar shouted, swinging his axe at the nearest monstrosity. The blade passed through it as if it were smoke, but the creature recoiled nonetheless, shrieking in pain or rage. Astrid and I stood back to back, fending off the ethereal horrors with desperate swings of our weapons. Helga chanted words of power, creating barriers of light that held the creatures at bay, if only for moments at a time. As we fought, I noticed something. Each time we struck one of the nightmarish beings, the swirling orb at the center of the chamber pulsed as if in pain. And with each pulse, Bjorn's form seemed to flicker and distort. "The orb," I called out to my companions. "It's connected to Bjorn and these creatures. We need to destroy it." Bjorn's roar of rage confirmed my suspicion. "You understand nothing. That is the seed of a new reality, the chrysalis from which the old ones will emerge to remake all of existence." We fought our way towards the central platform, the very air around us thick with eldritch energy. The creatures pressed in from all sides, their alien minds battering against our psyches. More than once I felt my grip on sanity slipping, only to be anchored by the presence of my friends. Finally, we reached the orb. Up close, it was even more terrifying, a swirling vortex of darkness that seemed to draw in all light and hope. Bjorn appeared before us, his form now so monstrous and alien that it was almost impossible to look at directly. "You cannot stop what has already begun," he intoned, his voice echoing across dimensions. "The old ones stir, they hunger. All will be consumed." Gunnar, bloodied but unbowed, hefted his axe. "Then we'll give them indigestion." With a mighty swing, he struck the orb. The impact sent shockwaves of energy rippling through the chamber. Cracks appeared in the orb's surface, leaking tendrils of pure darkness. Bjorn howled in agony, his form destabilizing further. The nightmarish creatures around us began to dissolve, drawn back into the fracturing orb. "Keep going," I shouted, adding my own blows to Gunnar's assault. Astrid and Helga joined us, striking at the orb with weapon and spell. With each hit, The cracks widened and Bjorn's cries grew more desperate. "You don't understand what you're doing," he pleaded, his voice now a mixture of the cosmic entity he had become and the elder we had once known. "If you destroy it, the backlash could tear apart the fabric of reality itself." Helga paused, her eyes wide with realization. He's right. The energy contained in that orb, if it's released all at once, it could destroy everything. For a moment we hesitated. Had we come all this way only to face an impossible choice? Let the corruption spread and doom all realities, or risk destroying everything in our attempt to save it? It was Astrid who broke the impasse. "There has to be another way. Helga, you're the most attuned to the energies here. Is there any way to, I don't know, channel the power somehow?" Helga's brow furrowed in concentration. "Maybe. If we could create a conduit, something to disperse the energy safely across multiple realities." "But what could possibly channel that much power?" Gunnar asked. The answer came to me in a flash of insight. Us. We could be the conduit. My companions looked at me in shock and dawning understanding. Bjorn, sensing our intention, let out a roar of defiance. "You cannot hope to contain such power. It will destroy you." I met the eyes of my friends, seeing in them the same mixture of fear and determination that I felt. "Maybe. But if there's even a chance it could save everything we love, isn't it worth the risk?" Gunnar nodded grimly. "Better to go out fighting than surrender to this madness." Helga took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I can guide the energy, but I don't know if I can protect us from it entirely." Astrid reached out, taking my hand. "Together, then. Whatever happens, we face it as one." We formed a circle around the fractured orb, joining hands. Helga began to chant, weaving a spell to channel the cosmic energies through us. Bjorn's form flickered and distorted, caught between dimensions as the power that had transformed him began to unravel. With a final, decisive blow, the orb shattered. For a moment, all was stillness and silence. Then, with a roar that shook the foundations of reality itself, the energy contained within burst forth. It hit us like a tidal wave of pure creation and destruction. I felt my body, my very essence, being torn apart and remade 1,000 times a second. Through it all, I clung to the hands of my companions, to the memory of why we had come here. Images flashed through my mind, glimpses of countless realities, of worlds born and dying in the blink of an eye. I saw Frosthaven as it was, as it could be, as it might have been in a million different timelines. And through it all, I felt the presence of my friends. Gunnar's unwavering strength, Helga's compassionate wisdom, Astrid's fierce love. Together, we formed a beacon in the chaos, a fixed point around which the maelstrom of cosmic energy could coalesce. How long we stood there, channeling the power of creation and unmaking, I couldn't say. It could have been moments or millennia. But gradually, I became aware of a change. The flow of energy was lessening, the chaos subsiding. With a final surge of power that threatened to overwhelm us entirely, the last of the orb's energy dispersed. The alien dimension around us began to collapse, reality reasserting itself. As the world faded to darkness, the last thing I heard was Astrid's voice, weak but triumphant. "We did it. We actually did it." Then oblivion took us. I awoke to the sound of birdsong and the feeling of soft grass beneath me. Opening my eyes, I found myself lying in a sunlit clearing in a forest that was blessedly, beautifully normal. Beside me, my companion stirred. We looked at each other in wonder and disbelief, taking stock of our bodies, marveling at the simple fact of our continued existence. Did we really survive that?" Gunnar asked, his voice hoarse. Helga sat up slowly, her eyes wide with awe. "We did more than survive. We channeled the power of creation itself. We remade reality." As her words sank in, I became aware of subtle changes. The air felt cleaner, more vibrant. The colors of the forest around us seemed richer, more alive. And in the distance I could hear the sounds of Frosthaven, people talking, laughing, living. "We should get back," Astrid said, helping me to my feet. "They'll want to know what happened." As we made our way through the forest, each step feeling like a miracle, I thought about the journey we had undertaken. We had ventured beyond the veil of reality itself, faced cosmic horrors and impossible choices, and somehow, against all odds, we had emerged victorious. But more than that, we had done so without losing ourselves, without sacrificing our humanity. In the end, it was our connection to each other, to our home and our people, that had given us the strength to channel the power of the old ones and reshape reality itself. As Frosthaven came into view, looking both familiar and somehow renewed, I felt a profound sense of hope. Whatever challenges the future might hold, I knew that together we could face them, for we had looked into the heart of creation and emerged stronger, wiser, and more united than ever before. The corruption was gone, the veil between worlds mended, and in its place a new chapter in the story of Frosthaven, of all realities, was about to begin. His weathered hands gripped the intricately carved dragon figurehead, his eyes scanning the endless expanse of water before him. "Captain," a voice called from behind. Leif turned to see his first mate, Bjorn, approaching with measured steps. "The crew is ready, and we await your command." Leif nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Thank you, Bjorn. Tell them to prepare for nightfall. We'll set sail with the morning tide." As Bjorn retreated to relay the orders, Leif returned his gaze to the sea. The sky was ablaze with vibrant oranges and pinks, the colors reflecting off the calm waters like a painting come to life. He inhaled deeply, savoring the crisp, clean air that filled his lungs. "Beautiful, isn't it?" a soft voice murmured beside him. Leif glanced down to see Astrid, the ship's healer, joining him at the bow. Her long blonde hair danced in the gentle breeze, and her eyes sparkled with the same sense of wonder that Leif felt in his heart. "Aye," he replied, his voice low and reverent. "The gods have blessed us with a fine evening." Astrid nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Do you think they'll continue to favor us on our journey?" Leif considered her question for a moment before answering. "The task ahead is great, Astrid. Freyr himself has entrusted us with the recovery of Skidbladnir. I believe the gods will watch over us, but we must also rely on our own strength and cunning." A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched the last rays of sunlight fade, giving way to the soft, purple hues of twilight. The first stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, like diamonds scattered across a velvet cloth. "Tell me, Captain," Astrid said, breaking the silence. "What do you hear when you listen to the waves?" Leif closed his eyes, focusing on the gentle lapping of water against the hull of the ship. The rhythmic sound was soothing, almost hypnotic. "I hear the heartbeat of the world," he said softly. "The endless cycle of tides, the whispers of distant shores, and the promises of adventures yet to come." Astrid smiled, nodding in agreement. "And what of our current adventure? What do the waves say about our quest to recover Skidbladnir?" Leif opened his eyes, meeting Astrid's curious gaze. "They speak of challenges, of fire and ice, but they also whisper of triumph, of the glory that awaits us if we stay true to our course." As if in response to his words, a cool breeze swept across the deck, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and distant mountains. Leif inhaled deeply, feeling a sense of calm settle over him. "Captain," Bjorn's voice called out once more. "The men have prepared the evening meal. Will you join us?" Leif turned to his first mate, noticing the flicker of torchlight that now illuminated the main deck. The sounds of laughter and conversation drifted towards them, a reminder of the camaraderie that bound their crew together. "Of course," Leif replied with a nod. He glanced at Astrid, gesturing for her to accompany them. "Come, let us break bread with our brothers and sisters. Tomorrow, our true journey begins." As they made their way to the center of the ship, Leif felt a surge of pride for his crew. Each face that greeted him was etched with determination and loyalty. They had volunteered for this perilous mission without hesitation, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Gudrun, the ship's cook, approached with a steaming bowl of hearty stew. "Eat well, Captain," she said, her weathered face creasing into a warm smile. "You'll need your strength for the trials that await us." Leif accepted the bowl gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma of herbs and wild game. "Your cooking alone could give us the strength to move mountains, Gudrun," he said with a chuckle. As the crew settled in for their meal, the sound of a lute filled the air. Eric, the young skald, began to weave a tale of ancient heroes and legendary quests. His voice rose and fell with the rhythm of the waves, casting a spell of wonder over the assembled Vikings. Leif listened intently, allowing the words to wash over him like the gentle tide. In the story, he heard echoes of their own mission, the theft of a divine treasure, the bravery of mortal heroes, and the ultimate triumph of courage and wit over seemingly insurmountable odds. As the last notes of Eric's song faded into the night, Leif stood, raising his drinking horn high. "My friends," he began, his voice carrying across the deck. "Tomorrow, we set sail on a quest unlike any other. We go not for gold or glory, but for the honor of the gods and the good of our people." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crew as Leif continued. "The fire giants may be formidable foes, but they have never faced the likes of us. We are children of the sea, blessed by Freyr himself. With the wind at our backs and the strength of our ancestors in our hearts, we shall prevail." A cheer erupted from the assembled Vikings, their voices rising into the star-studded sky. Leif felt a swell of emotion in his chest, a mixture of pride, determination, and the tingling excitement of impending adventure. As the celebration continued around him, Leif made his way back to the bow of the ship. The night had fully settled now, the sea a vast expanse of inky blackness broken only by the shimmering reflection of starlight. He leaned against the railing, feeling the cool wood beneath his palms. The whisper of the waves seemed louder now, urgent and full of promise. Leif closed his eyes, listening intently to their song. "We're ready," he whispered to the sea and stars. "Guide us true, and we shall return Skidbladnir to its rightful place." With a deep sense of peace and purpose, Leif turned back to join his crew, ready to face whatever adventures the dawn might bring. In the heart of Muspelheim, the fire giants reveled in their mischief, their booming laughter echoing through caverns of flame. Little did they know that their stolen prize, Skidbladnir, held secrets beyond their comprehension. Surtur, the mightiest of the fire giants, sat upon his throne of smoldering obsidian, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction as he gazed upon the miniaturized Skidbladnir. The magical ship, no larger than a child's toy in his massive hands, glinted in the flickering firelight of the cavern. "Brothers," Surtur's voice thundered, causing stalactites to tremble overhead. "Behold our greatest triumph, the pride of Freyr, the marvel of the Aesir, now rests in our grasp." A chorus of cheers and raucous laughter filled the cavern, the fire giants stamping their feet in jubilation. The very ground shook with their mirth, sending cascades of embers spiraling through the air. Logi, Surtur's lieutenant, stepped forward, his flame-red beard crackling with excitement. "My lord," he said, bowing deeply, "how did you manage such a feat? Surely Freyr's magic would have protected the ship?" Surtur's laughter boomed once more, echoing off the cavern walls. "Ah, Logi, you underestimate the cunning of the fire giants. We struck when Freyr was distracted by the summer solstice festivities. His guard was down, and his precious ship was ripe for the taking." The assembled giants roared their approval, raising their molten goblets in a fiery toast to their leader's cleverness. "Glud." A giantess with hair like dancing flames approached the throne with a curious glint in her eyes. "Great Surtur," she said, her voice a low, mesmerizing crackle. "What shall we do with this marvelous prize? Surely it holds power beyond mere transportation." Surtur leaned forward, his massive form casting long shadows across the cavern floor. "Indeed, my dear Glud, Skidbladnir is no ordinary vessel. It is said that it can fold up to fit in one's pocket, yet when unfurled, it can carry all the gods of Asgard." A murmur of awe rippled through the crowd. Elder, a young giant with an insatiable thirst for knowledge, pushed his way to the front. "But my lord," he called out, his voice tinged with both excitement and trepidation. "How can we harness such power? We are creatures of fire and earth, not of sea and sky." Surtur's eyes narrowed, a dangerous glint appearing in their fiery depths. "Are you questioning our ability, young elder? Do you doubt the strength and ingenuity of the fire giants?" Elder quickly backpedaled, his face flushing a deeper shade of orange. No, great Surtur. I merely seek to understand how we might best use this wondrous artifact." Logi stepped in, placing a calming hand on Surtur's arm. "The boy speaks out of curiosity, my lord. Perhaps we could demonstrate the ship's power, to inspire our kin and strike fear into the hearts of our enemies?" Surtur considered this for a moment, stroking his beard of living flame. "Yes," he mused, a wicked grin spreading across his face. "Yes, a demonstration would be most fitting. Gather round, my brethren. Witness the might of Skidbladnir." With surprising gentleness for one so massive, Surtur placed the miniature ship on the ground before his throne. He muttered a few words in the ancient tongue of giants, and suddenly, Skidbladnir began to grow. The assembled giants watched in awe as the ship expanded, its intricate details becoming clearer with each passing second. Delicate carvings along the hull depicted scenes from Norse mythology, while the sail, emblazoned with Freyr's sigil, unfurled majestically. Within moments, Skidbladnir had grown to its full size, dwarfing even the largest of the fire giants. Its presence seemed to bring a breath of cool sea air to the sweltering cavern, a tangible reminder of its otherworldly nature. "Behold," Surtur bellowed, his voice filled with triumph. "With this ship, we could sail the very skies themselves. We could rain fire and destruction upon Asgard, Midgard, and all the realms that have long scorned us." The fire giants cheered, their voices rising in a deafening cacophony of excitement and bloodlust. But amidst the celebration, Glud noticed something strange. A faint shimmer seemed to pass across the surface of Skidbladnir, almost as if the ship itself was recoiling from their touch. "My lord," she said, raising her voice to be heard above the din, "I fear the ship may not bend so easily to our will. Look how it shimmers, as if resisting our very presence." Surtur's expression darkened, his fiery brows furrowing in concentration. He reached out to touch Skidbladnir's hull, only to snatch his hand back with a roar of pain and surprise. Where his fingers had brushed the wood, angry red welts appeared on his usually impervious skin. "Treachery," he bellowed, rising to his full, terrifying height. "The ship resists us. It dares to turn its magic against the might of the fire giants." Logi stepped forward, his eyes wide with concern. "Perhaps, my lord, we have underestimated the complexity of Freyr's magic. The ship may require special handling." Elder, emboldened by the turn of events, spoke up once more. "What if we were to study it further? Surely, with time and patience, we could unravel its secrets and bend it to our will." Surtur, still nursing his wounded hand, glowered at the assembled giants. His anger was palpable, filling the air with waves of scorching heat. But beneath the rage, a cunning light gleamed in his eyes. "Very well," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "We shall study this infernal craft. Day and night we will work to unlock its powers, and when we do—" He paused, a cruel smile twisting his features. "When we do, all the realms will tremble before the might of Muspelheim." As the fire giants dispersed, each eager to begin unraveling the mysteries of Skidbladnir, Glud lingered behind, She gazed at the magnificent ship, a mixture of awe and trepidation swirling in her fiery eyes. "Oh, Skidbladnir," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the crackling of the ever-present flames. "What secrets do you hold, and at what cost will we learn them?" The ship remained silent, its presence a stark contrast to the chaotic energy of Muspelheim. But deep within its enchanted wood, unseen by the fire giants, a faint pulse of magic stirred. Skidbladnir may have been stolen, but its true power remained hidden, waiting for the day when it would return to its rightful master. The god friar gazed forlornly at the empty dock where Skidbladnir once rested. His heart ached for the loss of his beloved ship, a gift from the dwarves that had served him faithfully for centuries. The usually radiant god of sunshine and fertility stood in uncharacteristic gloom, his golden hair dulled and his shoulders slumped under the weight of his grief. "Skidbladnir," he whispered, his voice carrying on the gentle breeze that swept across Asgard. "Where are you, my faithful friend?" The dock creaked beneath his feet as he paced its length, remembering countless departures and joyous returns. Each step brought a new memory flooding back. Voyages to distant realms, celebrations under starlit skies, and quiet moments of reflection as Skidbladnir sailed through the cosmos. "Brother," a gentle voice called out. Freyr turned to see his twin sister Freya approaching. Her beauty was legendary, but today her face was etched with concern. "You've been here since dawn. Come, you must eat and rest." Freyr shook his head, his eyes never leaving the empty space where Skidbladnir should have been. "How can I rest, sister, when a part of me is missing?" Skidbladnir was more than a ship. It was... "I know," Freya said softly, placing a comforting hand on his arm. "It was a piece of your heart, but starving yourself won't bring it back." As if on cue, a rumble of thunder echoed across the sky. The siblings looked up to see dark clouds gathering, reflecting Freyr's turbulent emotions. "Even the heavens mourn with you," Freya observed. "But remember, brother, you are the god of sunshine. Your sorrow casts a shadow over all of Asgard." Freyr sighed heavily, running a hand through his tousled hair. "You're right, of course. But how can I bring light when I feel so diminished?" A new voice joined their conversation, deep and resonant. "By remembering who you are and what you represent." Odin, the All-Father, strode towards them, his ravens Hugin and Munin perched on his shoulders. His one eye gleamed with wisdom and compassion as he regarded Freyr. "All-Father," Freyr said, bowing his head in respect. I have failed in my duties. Skidbladnir was a treasure of Asgard, and I let it be taken." Odin placed a weathered hand on Freyr's shoulder. "No, my son, you have not failed. The fire giant's treachery is not your burden to bear alone." "But I should have protected it better," Freyr protested, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have." "Should-haves and could-haves will not change what has happened," Odin interrupted gently. "What matters now is how we respond." Freya nodded in agreement. "Odin is right, brother. We must focus on recovering Skidbladnir, not dwelling on its loss." Freyr looked between them, a spark of hope flickering in his eyes for the first time since the theft. "Recover it? But how? Muspelheim is a realm of fire and chaos. None of us can enter without risking war between the realms." Odin's eye twinkled with a hint of mischief. "Perhaps not us, no. But there are others who might succeed where gods cannot tread." "You mean mortals?" Freyr asked, his brow furrowing in confusion. "Indeed," Odin confirmed. "I have been watching a particular group of Vikings. Their captain, Leif, is a man of great courage and cunning. With the right guidance, he and his crew might be able to infiltrate Muspelheim and recover Skidbladnir." Freyr's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "But, All-Father, to send mortals on such a perilous quest, it would be tantamount to a death sentence." Freya interjected, her voice filled with excitement. "Not necessarily, brother. Remember the magic of Skidbladnir itself. It can shrink to the size of a toy. If we could grant these mortals the ability to shrink as well, they could sneak aboard undetected, Freyr exclaimed, his eyes widening with realization. Odin nodded approvingly. Precisely. It is a dangerous plan, to be sure, but one that offers hope where before there was none. Freyr turned back to the empty dock, his mind racing with possibilities. For the first time since Skidbladnir's theft, he felt a glimmer of hope stirring in his chest. "Very well," he said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "If these mortals are willing to undertake this quest, I will do everything in my power to aid them." As if responding to Freyr's renewed determination, the dark clouds overhead began to part, allowing rays of sunlight to pierce through. The dock, which had seemed so desolate before, now shimmered with promise. Freya smiled, squeezing her brother's hand. "There's the Freyr I know, the god of light and life, bringing hope even in the darkest times." Odin nodded, satisfaction evident in his weathered features. "I shall send word to Leif and his crew. Freyr, prepare whatever blessings and enchantments you deem necessary for their journey." As Odin turned to leave, Freyr called out, "Allfather, wait. I wish to speak with these mortals myself, to explain the importance of this quest, and to offer my personal pledge of gratitude for their bravery." Odin considered for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. I will arrange for you to appear to them in a vision. But remember, the choice must be theirs. We cannot compel them to undertake this perilous journey." Freyr straightened, a new sense of purpose filling him. "Of course, I understand." As Odin departed, Freyr turned once more to the empty dock. But now, instead of sorrow, his gaze held determination and hope. "Hold on, Skidbladnir," he whispered. "We're coming for you. And to you, brave Leif and your courageous crew, may the winds of fortune guide you on this most vital of quests." With renewed vigor, Freyr set about preparing for the task ahead. The dock, once a place of mourning, now buzzed with divine energy as the god of sunshine and fertility channeled his power into blessings and enchantments. The recovery of Skidbladnir was no longer a distant dream, but a mission about to unfold. And though challenges lay ahead, hope had returned to Asgard, shining as brightly as Freyr's own radiant smile. Leif gathered his loyal crew, their faces illuminated by firelight as he shared their divine mission. Each Viking felt a surge of pride and determination, ready to face any challenge for the glory of their gods and people. The longhouse was filled with the scent of wood smoke and the low murmur of anticipation. Leif stood at the head of the great table, his weathered hands resting on the intricately carved surface. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows across his face, highlighting the intensity in his eyes. "My friends," he began, his voice cutting through the hushed conversations, "we have been chosen for a task unlike any other. The god Freyr himself has called upon us." A collective gasp rippled through the assembled crew. Bjorn, Leif's trusted first mate, leaned forward, his bushy eyebrows raised in surprise. "The gods have spoken to you, Captain?" Leif nodded solemnly. "In a vision, as clear as I see you now. Freyr's magical ship, Skidbladnir, has been stolen by the fire giants of Muspelheim. We have been tasked with its recovery." For a moment, stunned silence filled the longhouse. Then, as one, the crew erupted into a cacophony of voices. "The fire giants? But how can we hope to stand against such foes? Surely this is madness." Leif raised his hand and gradually the voices quieted. "I understand your concerns. This quest is indeed perilous, beyond anything we have faced before. But consider the honor bestowed upon us. The gods have chosen us, mortal though we are, to right this wrong." Astrid, the ship's healer, spoke up, her voice calm, but tinged with worry. "Captain, while the honor is great, how can we hope to succeed where even the gods fear to tread?" Leif's eyes sparkled with a mixture of excitement and determination. "Ah, but that is where our mortality becomes our strength. Freyr has granted us a boon, the power to shrink ourselves to the size of insects. Murmurs of astonishment rippled through the crew. Eric, the young skald, leapt to his feet, his eyes wide with wonder. Like the stories of old, we shall be as clever mice sneaking past the slumbering giants. A chuckle passed through the group, easing some of the tension. Leif nodded approvingly at Eric. Indeed, young one. We will use our wits and this magical gift to infiltrate Muspelheim, board Skidbladnir, and sail it back to Asgard. Gudrun, the ship's cook and a woman of practical mind, furrowed her brow. But Captain, even if we can shrink ourselves, how are we to navigate the perils of Muspelheim? It's a realm of fire and chaos. Leif turned to her, his expression serious. You're right to be concerned, Gudrun. The journey will be fraught with danger. But remember, we are children of the North. Our ancestors have faced ice giants and terrible monsters. Are we to balk at a little heat? A chorus of agreement rose from the crew, their Viking pride stirred by Leif's words. Bjorn stood, raising his drinking horn high. I, for one, am with you, Captain. Let the fire giants tremble at our coming, for we bring the cold fury of the North. Cheers erupted throughout the longhouse. Leif felt a swell of pride in his chest as he looked at the faces of his crew, each one alight with determination and courage. But Astrid, ever the voice of caution, raised another question. What of our families, Captain? This quest could take us away for who knows how long. A hush fell over the group as they considered her words. Leif's expression softened as he addressed the concern. I won't lie to you, he said, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the room. This journey may be long and its dangers are great. I cannot promise that we will all return, but I can promise you this. Your families will be cared for in your absence, and should we fall, our names will be sung in the halls of Valhalla for eternity. He paused, looking each member of his crew in the eye. I ask much of you, I know, but I also offer you the chance to be part of something greater than ourselves, to aid the gods, to etch our names in the very fabric of the cosmos. Who among you will join me? For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then, slowly at first but with growing fervor, the Vikings began to stamp their feet and bang their cups on the table. The rhythmic sound grew until it shook the very rafters of the longhouse. Bjorn's voice rose above the din. We are with you, Captain, to Muspelheim and beyond. The crew took up the cry, their voices united in a roar of determination. To Muspelheim and beyond. Leif felt his heart swell with pride and gratitude. He raised his own drinking horn, his voice joining the chorus of his loyal crew. As the cheers continued, he caught glimpses of the emotions playing across their faces. Excitement, fear, determination, and above all, an unshakable loyalty. As the night wore on, the crew began to prepare for their unprecedented journey. Maps were pored over, provisions were discussed, and strategies debated. But underlying all the practical preparations was a current of electric anticipation. They were about to embark on a quest that would test them to their very limits, but also offered the chance for glory beyond their wildest dreams. In the corner, Eric strummed his lute, composing a new ballad to commemorate their impending adventure. The soft notes wove through the busy atmosphere, a reminder of the songs that would be sung of their deeds in the years to come. As dawn broke, casting its first pale light through the longhouse windows, Leif looked upon his crew once more. They were tired from a night of preparation, but their eyes shone with unwavering resolve. He knew in that moment that with these brave men and women by his side, there was no challenge they couldn't overcome. My friends, he said softly, his voice carrying in the hushed morning air. Let us make ready. Skidbladnir awaits, and with it, our date with destiny. As one, the crew rose, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, their determination a palpable force that would carry them through the fires of Muspelheim and beyond. With wide-eyed wonder, Leif and his crew watched as an ancient vulva wove her spells, shrinking them to the size of insects. The world around them transformed. everyday objects becoming colossal landscapes to explore. The air crackled with mystical energy as the vulva, known as Signa, stood before the assembled crew. Her silver hair flowed like moonlight, and her eyes held the wisdom of ages. The Vikings shifted nervously, a mixture of excitement and trepidation palpable among them. Sina raised her gnarled staff, adorned with runes and feathers. "Brave warriors," she intoned, her voice carrying an otherworldly resonance. "Are you prepared for the transformation that awaits you?" Leif stepped forward, his chin held high. "We are, wise one. We understand the risks and accept them willingly." Sina nodded, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Very well. Gather close and let the magic take hold." The crew huddled together, their shoulders touching as they formed a tight circle. Sina began to chant, her words weaving through the air like silk threads. As her voice rose and fell, a shimmering mist enveloped the Vikings. Astrid, the ship's healer, gasped as she felt a tingling sensation spread through her body. "Captain," she whispered, her eyes wide. "I feel strange." Leif nodded, experiencing the same sensation. "Stay calm," he advised, though his own heart was racing. "Trust in the vulva's magic." The mist grew thicker, obscuring their vision. For a moment, all they could see was swirling silver fog. Then, gradually, the mist began to clear. As it dissipated, the Vikings found themselves in a world utterly transformed. "By Odin's beard!" Bjorn exclaimed, his voice tiny but filled with awe. "Look at the size of everything." The crew gazed around in amazement. What had once been simple blades of grass now towered above them like massive trees. A pebble nearby resembled a small mountain, its craggy surface an entire landscape to explore. Leif looked up, craning his neck to see Sina's face far above them. Her eyes, now as large as the moon from their perspective, twinkled with amusement. "How do you feel, little ones?" Her voice boomed from above, the sound waves nearly knocking them off their feet. Leif cupped his hands around his mouth, shouting as loud as he could. "We are well, vulva. Your magic is truly astonishing." Sina's laughter rumbled through the air like distant thunder. "I'm glad to hear it. Now let us test your new forms." With a wave of her staff, she conjured a leaf nearby. To the miniaturized Vikings, it appeared as large as a ship's sail. "Climb," she instructed. "Show me that you can navigate this new world." The crew looked at each other, then at the leaf. Eric, the young skald, was the first to move. "Come on then," he called out cheerfully. "It's just like scaling the rigging, only greener." His enthusiasm was infectious, and soon the entire crew was scrambling up the leaf's surface. They found that their diminutive size came with increased agility and strength relative to their new world. Gudrun, usually more comfortable in the ship's galley than on climbing expeditions, surprised herself by reaching the top of the leaf first. "Ha!" she exclaimed, pumping her fist in triumph. "Who says cooks can't climb?" Leif joined her at the summit, surveying the vast expanse of what had once been a small clearing. "Well done, all of you," he said, pride evident in his voice. "We'll need this adaptability where we're going." As the crew celebrated their first victory in their new forms, Sina's voice rang out once more. "You have done well, little warriors, but remember the challenges in Muspelheim will be far greater than a simple leaf." Leif nodded solemnly. "We understand, wise one. What other advice can you offer us?" Sina leaned down, her enormous eye filling their vision. "Listen closely, for this is important. Your size may have changed, but your essence remains the same. You carry the strength of your ancestors, the cunning of your people, and the blessing of the gods. Let these be your guide in the land of giants." The vulva then produced a small pouch, which to the miniaturized Vikings appeared as large as a longhouse. "Within this," she explained, "you will find provisions suited to your new size, as well as tools that may prove useful on your quest." Leif and his crew watched in fascination as Sina opened the pouch, revealing an array of tiny weapons, ropes, and other equipment. "And what of changing back?" Astrid inquired, her practical nature shining through even in this fantastical situation. How will we return to our normal size when the time comes? Sina nodded approvingly at the question. A wise concern. I have prepared a special runestone for each of you. When the time comes to return to your natural state, simply hold the stone and speak the word Jotun. But be warned, choose the moment wisely, for you can only use this magic once. The crew murmured among themselves, the weight of their responsibility settling upon them. Leif stepped forward once more, his tiny voice filled with determination. We thank you, Völva for this incredible gift. We will use it wisely in our quest to retrieve Skidbladnir. Sina smiled down at them, her ancient eyes twinkling. May the Norns weave a favorable fate for you, brave ones. Now go, and may your journey be as grand as the task before you. With those parting words, Sina stepped back, leaving the miniaturized Vikings to explore their new world. The crew spent the next hours testing their newfound abilities, marveling at the changed perspective, and preparing for the journey ahead. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across what was once a simple patch of grass, Leif gathered his crew. Rest well tonight, he advised, gesturing to the shelter they had fashioned from leaves and twigs. Tomorrow we set out for Muspelheim. Our greatest adventure awaits. The Vikings settled in for the night, their minds whirling with the day's transformative events. As they drifted off to sleep, lulled by the now thunderous chirping of distant crickets, each of them dreamed of the challenges and wonders that lay ahead in their miniaturized quest to recover the god Freyr's magical ship. Heart pounding with excitement, Leif led his tiny crew across the vastness of Skidbladnir's deck. They marveled at the intricate craftsmanship, now visible in stunning detail, as they searched for a way to reclaim the ship. The miniaturized Vikings crouched behind a coil of rope that, from their perspective, resembled a mammoth labyrinth. The deck of Skidbladnir stretched out before them like a vast plain, its wooden planks now as wide as streets in their shrunken state. Leif peered cautiously around the rope coil, his keen eyes scanning for any sign of the fire giants. All clear for now, he whispered to his crew. Remember, we move silently and stick to the shadows. One misstep could alert the giants to our presence. Bjorn nodded, his usual boisterous demeanor subdued by the gravity of their situation. Aye, Captain, but where do we begin? This ship is enormous from our vantage point. Astrid, ever observant, pointed towards the stern. Look there, she said softly. I see a series of carvings that might provide us cover as we move. Leif followed her gaze, noting the intricate designs etched into the ship's railings. In their current size, these carvings appeared as deep ravines and towering cliffs, perfect for concealment. Good eye, Astrid, Leif commended. We'll make our way along the edge, using the carvings for cover. Stay alert for any movement. With a series of hand signals, Leif directed his crew to move out. They scurried across the open expanse of the deck, their hearts racing with each step. What would have been a brief walk in their normal size now felt like an epic journey. As they reached the first of the carved designs, Eric let out a low whistle of appreciation. By the gods, he murmured, running his hand along the intricate patterns. I've never seen craftsmanship like this. Each line tells a story. Gudrun nodded in agreement, her eyes wide with wonder. It's as if the very history of the Aesir is written here. Look, there's Odin on Sleipnir. Leif allowed his crew a moment to marvel at the artistry before gently urging them onward. We can admire the craftsmanship later. For now, we must focus on our mission. As they continued their trek along the railing, the Vikings encountered numerous obstacles that would have been insignificant in their normal size. A splinter in the wood became a fallen log to clamber over. A droplet of water left by sea spray formed a glistening pool they had to skirt around carefully. Suddenly, Bjorn held up a hand, signaling the group to halt. Listen, he hissed urgently. The crew froze, straining their ears. At first, they heard nothing but the creaking of the ship and the distant lapping of waves. Then a sound like rolling thunder reached them, growing louder with each passing second. Giants, Leif whispered, his face grim. Quick, into that knothole! The Vikings scrambled into a nearby imperfection in the wood, which now resembled a spacious cave. They pressed themselves against the walls, hardly daring to breathe as the thunderous footsteps grew nearer. From their hiding spot, they watched in awe and terror as a massive foot, easily the size of a mountain from their perspective, came into view. The foot was followed by another, the giant steps shaking the entire ship. "Curse this infernal vessel," a booming voice growled from far above. "It resists all our attempts to control it." Another voice, equally massive, replied, "Patience, brother. Surtur believes we will unlock its secrets soon. Keep searching for anything unusual." The giants' conversation continued as they moved across the deck, their words becoming indistinct as they moved away. Only when the last echoes of their footsteps faded did the Vikings dare to emerge from their hiding place. "That was too close," Astrid said, her face pale but determined. Leif nodded, his mind racing. "Indeed, but it also provided us with valuable information. The giants are struggling to control Skidbladnir. We might be able to use that to our advantage." As they resumed their journey across the deck, the crew's movements became even more cautious. Every shadow might hide a giant's eye. Every gust of wind could be a giant's breath. Yet their determination never wavered. After what felt like hours of careful navigation, they finally reached the ship's helm. The great wheel towered above them like a monument, its spokes forming a complex web of potential pathways. "This is it," Leif announced, his voice barely above a whisper, but filled with purpose. "If we can gain control of the helm, we might be able to steer Skidbladnir out of Muspelheim." Eric's eyes widened. "But Captain, how can we hope to move something so massive?" Leif smiled, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "We may be small, Eric, but we are still Vikings. More importantly, we have the blessing of Freyr. I believe that if we work together, Skidbladnir will respond to our touch." The crew exchanged determined glances, then began to climb the enormous wheel. As they ascended, they marveled at the intricate joinery and the smooth finish of the wood, details they never would have noticed at their normal size. Reaching the top of the wheel, Leif positioned his crew strategically around its circumference. "On my signal," he instructed, "we push with all our might. Remember, we're not just moving a ship, we're fulfilling a quest for the gods themselves." The Vikings braced themselves, muscles tensed and ready. Leif took a deep breath, feeling the weight of their mission on his shoulders. "Now!" he shouted. As one, the miniaturized crew pushed against the wheel. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, ever so slowly, they felt the wheel begin to turn. A thrill of triumph ran through the group as they realized their success. Skidbladnir, recognizing the touch of those blessed by its true master, was responding to their efforts. "It's working!" Bjorn exclaimed, his voice filled with joy and disbelief. Leif grinned, feeling the ship coming alive beneath them. "Keep pushing," he encouraged. "We're taking Skidbladnir home." As the great ship began to turn, responding to the tiny but determined efforts of Leif and his crew, they knew that their greatest challenge still lay ahead. But for now, they savored this small victory, their hearts filled with hope and the thrill of adventure. The deck of Skidbladnir, once a vast and daunting expanse, had become their battlefield. And on this battlefield, the minuscule Vikings were proving that size truly didn't matter when one had courage, cunning, and the favor of the gods on their side. Using their wit and ingenuity, Leif and his crew set elaborate traps throughout Skidbladnir. They watched with bated breath as the bumbling fire giants fell for each cleverly laid snare. The miniaturized Vikings huddled together in the shadow of a massive belaying pin, their voices barely above a whisper as they plotted their next move. "We've managed to take control of the helm," Leif said, his eyes gleaming with determination. "But we're not out of Muspelheim yet. We need to keep the giants distracted while we navigate our way home." Bjorn nodded, stroking his beard thoughtfully. "Aye, Captain. But how do we outsmart creatures that could crush us with a single misstep?" Astrid, ever the strategist, spoke up. "We use their size against them. They're so big they'll never suspect a threat from something as small as us. A sly grin spread across Gudrun's face. I think I have an idea, she said, her eyes twinkling with mischief. Remember how we used to catch rats in the longhouse? We could set up similar traps, just on a much larger scale. Leif's face lit up with excitement. Brilliant, Gudrun. We'll turn this entire ship into one giant trap. Eric, you and Bjorn gather any loose ropes or cables you can find. Astrid, see if you can locate any oil or grease in the ship's stores. Gudrun, you're with me. We're going to plan out our trap locations. The crew dispersed, each member scurrying off to their assigned tasks. As they worked, they could hear the thunderous footsteps and booming voices of the fire giants above deck. Hurry, Leif urged as they reconvened. We don't have much time before the giants realize something's amiss. Over the next few hours, the Vikings worked tirelessly, setting up an intricate network of traps throughout Skidbladnir. They used their small size to their advantage, weaving in and out of tight spaces to create tripwires, greased patches, and precarious piles of debris that would seem innocuous to the massive giants. As they put the finishing touches on their last trap, a sudden bellow from above deck made them freeze. The ship, a giant's voice roared. It's changing course. Leif grinned at his crew. That's our cue. Everyone to your positions. The Vikings scattered, each taking up a vantage point near one of their traps. They watched with a mixture of anticipation and fear as enormous feet stomped across the deck, shaking the entire ship. Check the lower decks, another giant commanded. The ship must be malfunctioning. Leif held his breath as a colossal figure descended the stairs, ducking to fit through the doorway. The giant's eyes swept the room, passing right over the tiny Vikings without noticing them. Suddenly, the giant's foot caught on one of their carefully placed tripwires. With a roar of surprise, the massive being stumbled forward, arms flailing wildly. Now, Leif shouted. Bjorn and Eric tugged on a rope, releasing a cascade of barrels that had been precariously balanced above. The barrels rained down on the giant, not causing any real harm, but certainly adding to the chaos and confusion. The giant bellowed in frustration, trying to regain his footing, but as he stepped forward, he hit one of the greased patches Astrid had prepared. His feet flew out from under him, and he crashed to the deck with a thunderous impact that shook the entire ship. What in Surtur's name is going on down there? A voice called from above. It's like the ship itself is fighting us, the fallen giant growled, struggling to his feet. Leif couldn't help but chuckle at the irony of the giant's words. If only they knew, he whispered to Astrid, who grinned back at him. As more giants came to investigate, they too fell victim to the Vikings' traps. One found himself entangled in a net that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Another tripped over a rope stretched between two posts, landing face first on the deck. The chaos continued for what seemed like hours. The giants, growing increasingly frustrated and confused, stumbled from one trap to another. Their size, once their greatest advantage, had become their downfall in the confined spaces of the ship. I don't understand, one giant wailed after falling into yet another snare. How can a ship be so treacherous? It's not the ship, you fool, another retorted. Someone must be sabotaging us. Leif signaled to his crew to fall back as the giants began to search more thoroughly. They retreated to a small nook near the helm, barely containing their laughter as they watched the continued bumbling of their enormous foes. I never thought I'd see the day when fire giants could be defeated by a few ropes and some spilled oil. Bjorn chuckled, wiping tears of mirth from his eyes. Never underestimate the power of cleverness over brute strength, Leif replied, his chest swelling with pride at his crew's ingenuity. As the giants continued to argue and stumble about, Leif turned to his team. You've all done wonderfully, he said, his voice filled with gratitude and admiration. But our work isn't done yet. While they're distracted, we need to make sure we're on the right course back to Asgard. The crew nodded, their faces set with determination once more. They had outsmarted the fire giants, turning Skidbladnir into a maze of traps and pitfalls. Now, they just needed to guide the magical ship home. As they made their way back to the helm, carefully avoiding the giants' massive feet, Leif couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. They had taken on beings many times their size and, through wit and teamwork, had emerged victorious. The journey was far from over, but Leif knew that with this crew by his side, there was no challenge they couldn't overcome. As they reached the helm, ready to guide Skidbladnir on the next leg of its journey, Leif smiled to himself. This would certainly be a tale worthy of the Skalds. The day a group of miniature Vikings outsmarted the fire giants and reclaimed a god's magical ship. As Skidbladnir unfurled its magical sails, Leif felt a surge of exhilaration. The ship rose into the air, leaving the bewildered fire giants far below, their angry roars fading into the distance. The miniaturized Vikings clung to the rigging of the great ship, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement as Skidbladnir began to lift off from the fiery realm of Muspelheim. The heat that had been oppressive moments before began to dissipate, replaced by a cool breeze that whispered of freedom. "By Odin's eye," Bjorn exclaimed, his voice barely audible over the whoosh of wind. "We're flying." Leif, gripping tightly to a rope that in their diminutive state felt as thick as a tree trunk, couldn't help but laugh. "Aye, my friend. Skidbladnir is no ordinary ship. It sails the seas of the sky as easily as those of the earth." As they ascended, the landscape of Muspelheim shrank beneath them. Rivers of lava became glowing threads, and the towering fortresses of the fire giants were reduced to smoldering embers. The angry bellows of their foes grew fainter with each passing moment. Astrid, ever practical, called out over the rushing wind, "Captain, we may have escaped, but we're still the size of insects. How are we to control this massive vessel?" Leif's brow furrowed as he considered the challenge. Then, a smile spread across his face as an idea struck him. "We don't need to control every aspect of the ship," he shouted back. "Skidbladnir is imbued with Freyr's magic. We just need to guide it." With newfound determination, Leif began to climb towards the ship's wheel, his tiny form dwarfed by the massive structure. "Follow me," he called to his crew. "We'll need all hands for this." One by one, the Vikings made their way to the wheel, scaling what to them was a monumental height. As they reached their destination, they spread out along the wheel's circumference. "Now," Leif instructed, "we push together. Think of Asgard, of Freyr, of home. Skidbladnir will understand our intent." With a collective grunt of effort, the miniaturized crew threw their weight against the wheel. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then slowly but surely, the great ship began to turn. "It's working," Eric cried out jubilantly. "We're changing course." As if responding to their efforts, Skidbladnir's sails billowed with renewed energy. The ship picked up speed, cutting through the air like a knife through butter. Gudrun, peering over the edge of the deck, gasped in awe. "Look below," she called out. "We're passing through the branches of Yggdrasil itself." The crew paused in their efforts to witness the spectacular sight. The world tree stretched out beneath them, its mighty branches forming a network of glowing pathways between the realms. They caught glimpses of Midgard, Jotunheim, and other worlds as they sped past. "Stay focused," Leif reminded them, though he too was struck by the majesty of their surroundings. "We're not safe until we reach Asgard." As they journeyed on, new challenges arose. Gusts of wind that would have been mild to a normal-sized ship threatened to sweep them off the deck. Strange, ethereal creatures, curious about the flying vessel, approached to investigate. "Hold tight, everyone," Leif shouted as a particularly strong gust buffeted the ship. "And keep an eye out for any threats." Bjorn, who had taken up a position near the bow, suddenly called out in alarm, "Captain, there's something ahead. It looks like a storm?" Leif squinted into the distance, his heart sinking as he saw the roiling mass of clouds approaching. Lightning flickered within the dark formation, and he could hear the ominous rumble of thunder. "It's no ordinary storm," Astrid said, her voice filled with awe and fear. "Those must be Thor's thunderclouds." The crew exchanged worried glances. Even at their normal size, navigating such a storm would be perilous. In their current state, it seemed almost impossible. But Leif's face was set with determination. "We've come too far to turn back now," he declared. "Bjorn, Eric, man the sails. Gudrun, Astrid, help me with the wheel. We're going to thread our way through." As they approached the storm, the air crackled with electricity. Lightning bolts, as large as mountains from their perspective, lanced past the ship. The thunder was deafening, shaking Skidbladnir to its very core. "Left!" Leif shouted, and the crew strained to turn the wheel. Skidbladnir responded, narrowly avoiding a massive lightning strike. "Right!" came the next command, and again they dodged disaster. For what seemed like an eternity, they navigated through the storm, each moment fraught with danger. The Vikings worked in perfect unison, their earlier trials having forged them into an unbreakable team. Finally, after one last gut-wrenching turn, they burst through the other side of the storm. The air cleared, and in the distance, they could see the gleaming spires of Asgard. A cheer went up from the exhausted crew. They had done it. Against all odds, they had escaped Muspelheim, navigated Yggdrasil, braved Thor's storms, and were now approaching the realm of the gods. As they drew closer to Asgard, Leif felt a tingling sensation spreading through his body. He looked down to see himself and his crew beginning to grow, returning to their normal size. The magic is wearing off, he realized aloud. Freyr must be nearby. Sure enough, as Skidbladnir gently touched down on the shores of Asgard, they saw the god Freyr approaching, his face beaming with joy and gratitude. Leif turned to his crew, his heart swelling with pride. "We did it, my friends," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We've returned Skidbladnir to its rightful owner." As they disembarked, ready to meet Freyr and conclude their incredible journey, each Viking knew that they had just lived through a tale that would be told for generations to come. The great escape of Skidbladnir, orchestrated by a crew no bigger than insects, would go down in legend as one of the greatest adventures in Norse history. Freyr's eyes shimmered with joy as Skidbladnir glided gracefully back to its rightful place. The god's warm smile filled Leif and his crew with a sense of accomplishment and honor. As the magical ship touched down on the glittering shores of Asgard, Leif and his crew stood on the deck, their bodies still tingling from the recent return to their normal size. The radiant light of the god realm bathed them in a golden glow, a stark contrast to the fiery depths of Muspelheim they had so recently escaped. Freyr strode towards them, his every step causing flowers to bloom in his wake. His presence was overwhelming, filling the air with an aura of vitality and abundance. As he approached, Leif and his crew dropped to one knee, bowing their heads in reverence. "Rise, brave warriors," Freyr's voice rang out, melodious and filled with warmth. "You have accomplished a feat worthy of the greatest sagas." Leif stood, his heart pounding with a mixture of awe and pride. "Lord Freyr," he began, his voice steady despite his nerves, "we return Skidbladnir to you, as was our sacred duty." Freyr's smile broadened, his eyes twinkling with gratitude. "And you have done so with a courage and ingenuity that has impressed even the gods. Come, tell me of your journey." As if on cue, the air shimmered around them, and suddenly they found themselves in a grand feasting hall. Long tables laden with sumptuous foods and overflowing mead horns stretched as far as the eye could see. At the head of the hall sat Odin himself, his one eye gleaming with interest. "Speak, Leif Erikson," Odin's voice boomed across the hall. "Let all of Asgard hear of your great deed." Leif swallowed hard, feeling the weight of every divine gaze upon him. But as he looked at his crew, seeing their encouraging nods, he found his voice. "Great Odin, Lord Freyr, and all assembled gods," he began, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Our journey began with your blessing, and a magic beyond our comprehension." As Leif recounted their adventure, the hall hung on his every word. He spoke of their transformation, of sneaking aboard Skidbladnir under the very noses of the fire giants. He told of their clever traps and daring escape, of braving the branches of Yggdrasil and Thor's mighty storms. When he finished, a moment of awed silence fell over the hall before it erupted into thunderous applause. The gods themselves rose to their feet, honoring the mortal heroes before them. Freyr stepped forward once more, his face beaming with pride. Leif Erikson, you and your crew have proven yourselves worthy of legend. Your names shall be sung in the halls of Asgard for eternity. Bjorn, usually the most boisterous of the crew, found himself speechless in the face of such praise. It was Astrid who found her voice first. Lord Freyr, she said, bowing her head respectfully, we are honored by your words. But tell us, how did Skidbladnir come to be stolen in the first place? A shadow of regret passed over Freyr's face. Ah, brave Astrid, your question is just. I'm afraid my own complacency was to blame. I had grown too confident in Skidbladnir's magic, believing it beyond the reach of any who would dare to steal it. The fire giants proved me wrong, much to my shame. Odin's voice cut through the hall once more. Let this be a lesson to all, he declared. Even the mightiest among us can fall prey to overconfidence. It took the courage and cleverness of these mortals to right what we gods had allowed to go wrong. A murmur of agreement passed through the assembled deities. Leif felt a swell of pride, not just for himself but for all of humanity. They had proven their worth in the eyes of the gods themselves. Freyr turned back to the crew, his eyes twinkling. Now, brave ones, you must tell me, how did you manage to control Skidbladnir at your diminutive size? Even I find it challenging at times, and I am its master. Eric, the young skald, stepped forward eagerly. My lord, it was Captain Leif's insight that guided us. He realized that we didn't need to control every aspect of the ship. We just needed to guide its intent. Freyr's eyebrows rose in surprise. Truly? Leif Erikson, you have understood a fundamental truth about Skidbladnir that few have grasped. The ship is not merely a vessel, but a living extension of my will. By aligning your intent with its purpose, you unlocked its full potential. Gudrun, who had remained quiet until now, spoke up. Lord Freyr, if I may, during our journey, we saw wonders beyond imagination. The branches of Yggdrasil, realms we had only heard of in stories. How can we return to our normal lives after experiencing such marvels? Freyr's expression softened, understanding shining in his eyes. Ah, Gudrun, that is the blessing and the curse of the hero's journey. You have seen behind the veil of the world, and you will carry that knowledge with you always. But do not think your adventures are at an end. The world of mortals holds wonders of its own, waiting for brave explorers to discover them. Odin stood then, his presence commanding the attention of all in the hall. Leif Erikson and his valiant crew, you have earned more than just our gratitude. You have proven yourselves true heroes, worthy of the greatest rewards Asgard can bestow. Speak your desires, and if it is within our power, it shall be granted. Leif looked at his crew, seeing the same mix of awe and determination in their eyes that he felt in his heart. He turned back to the assembled gods, standing tall and proud. Great Odin, Lord Freyr, and all the gods of Asgard, he said, his voice ringing clear and true. We ask not for riches or immortality. Instead, we request your blessing for our future voyages. Grant us the wisdom to explore, the courage to face the unknown, and the strength to overcome any obstacle in our path. A smile spread across Odin's face, and he nodded approvingly. Well spoken, Leif Erikson. Your request shows true wisdom. So be it. You and your crew shall have our blessing in all your future endeavors. As the gods murmured their agreement, Leif felt a warmth spreading through his body. He knew, in that moment, that their lives had been forever changed. They had returned Skidbladnir, earned the respect of the gods, and secured a future filled with promise and adventure. The feast that followed was one for the ages, a celebration of mortal heroism and divine gratitude. And as Leif and his crew shared their tale with eager listeners, they knew that this was not the end of their story, but merely the beginning of an even greater saga. As a reward for their bravery, Freyr bestowed upon Leif and his crew the gift of favorable winds. From that day forward, their sails always billowed with gentle breezes, carrying them to new adventures across the vast, mysterious sea. The golden light of Asgard began to fade as Leif and his crew prepared to return to Midgard. They stood at the edge of the Bifrost, the rainbow bridge shimmering beneath their feet. Freyr approached them, his eyes twinkling with a mixture of gratitude and mischief. "Brave warriors," the god began, his voice as warm as a summer breeze. "You have proven yourselves worthy of the greatest honor. But more than that, you have shown a spirit of adventure that rivals even that of the gods." Leif bowed his head respectfully. "You honor us, Lord Freyr. We only did what any true Viking would do." Freyr chuckled, the sound like distant thunder. "Perhaps, Leif Erikson, but not every Viking would have succeeded as you did. And so I have a final gift for you and your crew." The god raised his hands, and suddenly the air around them began to stir. It started as a gentle whisper, barely ruffling their hair, but quickly grew into a swirling vortex of wind that enveloped them all. Bjorn's eyes widened in awe. "What manner of magic is this, my lord?" Freyr's smile broadened. "This, my friends, is the blessing of the wind. From this day forward, favorable winds will always fill your sails. No matter where you journey, the breath of Asgard will guide you." Astrid, ever practical, furrowed her brow. "But Lord Freyr, how will this blessing work? Will we simply never face a headwind again?" The god shook his head, his expression becoming more serious. "Not quite, clever Astrid. The winds will still challenge you at times. For what is an adventure without some adversity? But when you truly need it, when your need is greatest, the winds will always be at your back." Leif felt a surge of excitement course through him. With this blessing, there would be no limit to where they could explore. "Thank you, Lord Freyr," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We will use this gift wisely." As the wind died down, Freyr nodded solemnly. "I know you will, Leif Erikson. Now go, return to Midgard. Great adventures await you." With a final bow, Leif and his crew turned and began their journey across the Bifrost. As they walked, they could feel the god's blessing settling into their very beings, becoming a part of them. Weeks later, back in Midgard, Leif and his crew stood on the deck of their longship. The fjord stretched out before them, leading to the open sea and unknown horizons beyond. The sails hung limp in the still air, but there was no anxiety among the crew. They knew what was coming. Leif stood at the helm, his hand resting lightly on the tiller. He closed his eyes, feeling the latent power of Freyr's blessing stirring within him. "Are you ready, my friends?" he called out. A chorus of affirmations rang out across the deck. Leif opened his eyes, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Then let us see where the winds of Asgard will take us." As if responding to his words, a breeze began to pick up. It started gently, just enough to ripple the water's surface. Then it grew stronger, filling their sail with a satisfying snap. The ship began to move, cutting through the water with graceful ease. Gudrun laughed in delight. "It's true, the blessing is real." Eric, the young skald, was already composing a verse. "With Freyr's wind at our backs, no shore is too distant, no adventure too grand." As they sailed out of the fjord and into the open sea, the wind continued to build. It wasn't a wild, uncontrollable gale, but a steady, powerful force that seemed to wrap around their ship like a protective embrace. Bjorn, standing at the bow, turned to Leif with a grin. "Where to, Captain? With this wind we could sail to the very edge of the world." Leif considered for a moment, feeling the pull of the unknown. "Why stop at the edge, my friend? Let's see what lies beyond." For days they sailed, the wind never faltering. They passed familiar coastlines and ventured into uncharted waters. Each morning, Leif would stand at the helm, close his eyes, and feel for the guidance of Freyr's blessing. Without fail, the wind would adjust, always pushing them towards new discoveries. They encountered storms, of course. The sea was not a place of constant calm. even with a god's blessing. But each time the waves rose threateningly or lightning split the sky, Leif would call upon Freyr's gift. The wind would shift, guiding them safely through the tempest. One evening, as they sat around the fire on a newly discovered shore, Astrid voiced a question that had been on her mind. "Captain, do you think this blessing will last forever?" Leif looked up at the star-filled sky, considering her words. "I'm not sure, Astrid. The ways of the gods are mysterious. But I believe that as long as we honor the spirit of the gift, the spirit of exploration and adventure, the winds will favor us." Eric nodded enthusiastically. "And even if the blessing were to fade, look at all we've already accomplished. We've sailed further than any Vikings before us, seen wonders beyond imagination." "Aye," Bjorn agreed, raising his drinking horn. "And we'll keep sailing with or without divine winds. It's who we are now." Leif smiled at his crew, feeling a swell of pride. "Well said, my friends. The true blessing isn't just the favorable wind. It's the spirit of adventure that Freyr awakened in us." As they continued their journey in the days and weeks that followed, Leif and his crew realized that the blessing of the wind was more than just a supernatural aid. It was a reminder of their incredible adventure, of the time they stood among the gods. It pushed them to explore further, to never settle for the known when the unknown beckoned. And so, with sails full of Asgard's breath and hearts full of Viking courage, Leif Erikson and his crew sailed on. They discovered new lands, encountered strange peoples, and faced challenges that would become the stuff of legend. Through it all, the wind at their backs reminded them of the greatness they had touched and the endless possibilities that lay ahead on the vast, mysterious sea.